So
Sir.
Hey, Mike, how are you?
Good. Well, of course. Glad you're here. I got my slides to you hours ago. Others have not, I'm guessing.
Like minutes before. It's like, they're like, are you coming to lunch? I'm like, no, because you just sent me your slides.
Gosh.
I need Dirk.
Oh my God.
Hello. Sorry. Yeah. He must be old to pay. Back-to-back weeks of tough, right? You know that better than anyone.
You were in Manchester with the ice house. How'd it go?
Well, some contentious issues.
Mark suggests, I haven't had a chance to catch up with Mark, and he said I had to just, yeah. Which by him. fly into here? Would you fly into here?
On Sunday.
Okay, direct from London.
Yeah, so it might just have to moment.
Very good. Yeah, we got converted for medical emergency. We got converted to Paris.
Somebody.
Not well. There was a doctor across the aisle from the tended to her. But that cost us 4 or 5 hours. He was very pleased at how quickly he got out of Paris, but he said it can be very complex with all the people on an unexpected flight into the country, especially France. So we were on the ground for about 2.5, 3 hours. Not too bad, not too bad in his words. Just take them off mute and then the people on
The
on
only
live
thing
should
is
be
that
able to,
the cameras in the room are not on the Zoom call.
right,
which is-
that's fine.
That's okay.
Yep, I think that's fine.
Okay.
I think we'll be good like this. Perfect, cool.
Okay.
Thank you, Dirk.
I was no help, but all right.
No, no. You helped me think through it. I do need your assistance. Yes. Okay. So I can't do it all. Can you log into the Zoom session? Right. Be on mute. Yeah. And just help me with questions that come in via Zoom. I'm gonna grab you a microphone here in just a second. Okay, yeah, sure. Cool, awesome, thank you.
And you're logged in, do you want to kick us off?
Oh, yeah, so let me get,
Do you have Zoom set up? Or do you, Dirk's in the, Philip's in the hallway if you needed him.
all good, we're as good as we're gonna get.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, this is as good as it's gonna get.
Is he connected?
That's only quarter-mile wide.
All right, we're ready to kick off. So if everyone standing can seat. And we've got our Zoom colleagues in online, I hope.
Can those on Zoom hear us okay?
Oh, yeah.
There's Mark. Clear.
Loud and clear.
So,
Voice is going to come in locally to the computer, not into the whole room. So just beware if anyone tries to go off mute. It's going to be a little tricky. Okay, so welcome to the OpenID Foundation workshop, spring of 2024. I have absolutely no idea how many of these there have been, but this might be the last one of its kind. We're thinking about expanding the scope in the way that we structure these workshops to have even more conversation, to be even more relevant to you as members. So more to come on that offline. But for today's session, we're going to have a similar approach to usual, where we're going to talk about the progress in many of our working groups. And we're also going to bring in a few specific discussion topics, a new community group, and two key topics around identity and AI and identity and post-quantum computing that we'll hit at the end. So as we always want to do things by the book, our note well statement reminds everyone that this is a public space. And so obviously not to make contributions of anything that is of a confidential nature that you would be uncomfortable being in the public domain. So it is a fully open environment for the day. Like progress. We need to click something, go down a page. Oh, it's going to be a brief presentation. There we go. How do I progress? Use that? Okay. So obviously a warm thanks to our hosts here at Google. Really a beautiful venue and great to have the hybrid capabilities that you have at Google, and many Google folks are in the crowd. Our board members, Philip and Dirk, had mentioned that a lot of the tickets to participate in IIW this week has taken off, and I know many of you are actively involved in standards with the OpenID Foundation. So thank you for your leadership and for offering us the space today. I'm going the wrong way around. Okay, now we got it. Okay, so for this session,
Gail, is it possible to share the slides online as well?
Give us a sec. All right, I think you're
That looks good.
Thank you. So we will kick off in a moment with a welcome from Nat, who'll share a few words. Then we'll jump into Mark Hain presenting on the eKYC and IDA working group, the home of the identity assurance specs. Then we're going to jump over to Authzen, one of our newest working groups, I think the very newest one, talking about their work, including some exciting progress on interop. And Mike Jones will speak to AV Connect, the home of the OpenID Connect and Federation specs. And Nat will share the FAPI working group update. And hopefully we'll get to some of the global adoption that we're seeing on FAPI as part of that brief discussion. Bjorn will talk to Moderna, and then Christina and Joseph will speak to the DCP working group update with the OpenID for verifiable credential family of specs. Tim will talk to shared signals, and then we'll have a bit of a break before we get into the last hour and talk about a few other exciting areas. So we'll have certification with Joseph. Dean Sachs will be talking to Death and the Digital Estate, a new community group that will be proposed in the weeks ahead. So breaking news, this is the first time that Dean will talk about it in public, and then he'll continue the conversation at IIW prior to, we hope, formalizing things in line with Identiverse. I will give a brief update on the work of the Sustainable and Digital Identity Hub. And last but not least, we're going to have an open kind of listening session with 4 discussants on each of post-quantum computing and identity, as well as AI and identity, and really just start those conversations on what's happening and does the OpenID Foundation have a role to play to address the emerging challenges there. Okay, so it should be a good session. Thanks again for coming. Do you have any comments to add, Nat?
So thank you very much for coming to this workshop. We are at the very interesting town of the events for the digital identity. I was in Manchester for the ISO meeting, and the AI and identity and privacy was one of the topic, as well as something like metaverse, as well as the brain-computer interface, and lots of course, the quantum computing as well. So there are lots of changes, and it's going to be an exciting time. So I'm looking forward to hear you guys discuss. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you, Nat. Okay, so we're trying to get onto the eKYC slides, and I think, Mark, you were going to present these, but are we going to be able to get his voice through?
We should, if we get here. Mark, go ahead. I'll do
Hey,
it for you.
thank you very much, Mike. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. So I have 15 minutes. It may not take that long, but I'm sure there'll be plenty of other things you guys can cover in the session later on. So the eKYC and IDA working group has been beavering away quite hard on various specs over the last period. Our objective is to extend OpenID Connect to include standardized schema for expressing and requesting identity assurance metadata. And actually, we've extended that a little further to say it's not just OpenID Connect that might be able to use that standardized schema. We have a 4th implementers draft, which was released quite some time ago now, over a year ago. And the JOC Claims Registry request was submitted. What we've been doing since then is splitting the main document, OpenID Connect for Identity Assurance Implementers Draft 4, across 4 separate documents, actually. So we've got one which is OpenID Connect for Identity Assurance. That one is the OpenID Connect description of how to use the following document, which is the identity assurance schema definition. So effectively saying how the structure of the payload should be. Again, briefly mentioned it earlier, we have a separate document for registering additional claims into the IANA JOC Claims Registry. Again, to make sure that each individual document is smaller and more easily consumed. And then finally, another draft that will be progressing very shortly as well is OpenID attachments. That one is needed in this context for the case where the image of a piece of evidence like a driving license or a passport is needed. There are some cases where that is required from a regulatory perspective. So the modularization job to go from 1 document to 4 has been completed. Next slide, please, Mike. Oh, wrong way. So the identity assurance drafts, are now going through final review, and I'm pleased to say that a number of the working group members have had a hand in doing that, hopefully very last editorial review before we propose it for review by the whole foundation, with a recommendation to approve it for final. We've got a little bit of a backlog of editorial issues that have emerged, but I think that's a really good sign that people are giving it the close scrutiny it needs before going to final. I'd like to specifically call out thanks to Taka, Kosuke, Nat, and Dima for their detailed review, and for Hidari for supporting me on the hard work of addressing all of those issues. It's ongoing, and we're getting it dealt with as quickly as we possibly can. Next slide, Mike. So other activities that have been going on, we have profiles and registry topics under discussion. So those are profiles for documenting the different types of evidence that are going to be needed. We want to provide a big list of all of the different types of evidence and how to represent them so that there's no interoperability issues at that level. And likewise, for the elements of an identity assurance process, they kind of need to be standardized and put in a registry somewhere as well. So I've been talking with a few people about how to move that forward. The identity assurance JSON schemas have been updated to the latest version. Thanks to Gabe for that, for his good work. And also having had a good discussion about where to home those JSON schemas in a longer term sense. The Bitbucket that we have right now doesn't seem like a very good kind of resting place for those documents. So been working out where to put those. In terms of next steps, the IDA specs, the set of three that we talked about there, the identity assurance, OpenID Connect identity assurance document, the IDA schema document, and the JOT claims registry should go to final first. Following that, we're going to start working on the conformance testing tool to bring that up to a kind of finished implementation as well. After we've got the three identity assurance related specs moved into final, we're going to start the final review and move towards final for the attachments draft as well. That one's next in line. And then we've got the other specs that we've been looking at. So advanced syntax for claims, moving that towards implementers draft 1, and the OpenID Connect for authority draft, moving towards implementers draft 1. And we've talked about registry for evidence and assurance process types. Next slide, Mike. So externally, there's been quite a lot of kind of communication and interest going on. So we already know we've got IDA implementations operational in Germany, Scotland, Australia, the Czech Republic, and Japan. There's already known projects underway in the UK and the US, which will be implementing the identity assurance drafts, hopefully final specs before long. There's collaboration with the Digital Agency of Japan on using some of our work as well. We've delivered presentations to the Camara working group about the IDA specs and advanced syntax for claims, which has been facilitated by Kosuke and Bjorn. We have included the IDA drafts in feedback to the UK Department of Science, Innovation and Technology and Ofcom. So DCIT is working on a trust framework for digital identity in the UK, and Ofcom is doing work around age assurance, and we've had the opportunity to provide feedback on their consultation requests. The collection of OpenID Connect for identity assurance, OpenID for IDA, and advanced syntax for claims was presented to ISO SC 27 Working Group 5, in particular context with the ISO 27566 Part 3, Age Assurance Technical Architecture document that's under development. and Curity have kindly done a tutorial post on how to implement verified claims using their product. And if I remember correctly, Mike, that might be my last slide. Yeah. So any questions before I hand over to David and Omri?
Any questions for Mark?
Can you elaborate on what happened in Manchester?
Hey, Mark, Gail's requesting if you could elaborate briefly on what happened in Manchester last week.
Yeah, sure. So while lots of people from our community were in Rome at the OS Security Working Group having lots of fun down there, I went to Manchester with Nat, and we attended a kind of joint event, which was ISO SC27 Working Group 5, which is the one about identity management. And also, let me get the name of it right, the Age Assurance Global Summit. So there was a whole kind of small but very, very focused industry event about all sorts of happenings in age assurance. But what that led to was a group of really interesting people who've got real age assurance use cases primarily front and center in their minds. So there were people from all over the world participating. The global nature was mainly on the ISO side, but we also had a number of global players looking specifically at the age assurance providers side of things. So I managed to not only spend time in the ISO working groups, learning a bit of what's going on over there and sharing the work of the OpenID Foundation generally into that community, as Nat does, but also spent time with the age assurance community, and there's quite a deal of interest in how we might use OpenID Connect and to some extent the decentralized, digital credential protocols work to deliver on age assurance use cases. Among others, I met with, so NIST were there, as were a couple of UK regulatory bodies, in particular Ofcom. So there were two people representing Ofcom, and the Information Commissioner's Office of the UK, so the one about data privacy and the implementation of GDPR requirements. Is that enough, Gail?
I think that'll do for now.
Cool. Any questions about that stuff, just give me a shout.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay.
Anything else for Mark? Very good.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, Mark, for staying up late and joining us.
Hey, Mark. Hi, everyone. It's been about 6 months since Atul and I stood up in front of all of you last time, and we humbly asked for your sponsorship of a new working group called the Auth Working Group to standardize all the innovation and all the new work that's happening in the authorization space. And so I'm standing in here for David, who is also on the phone, right, David?
Yep, muted, but I'm here.
We can hear you. Excellent. Just a couple of slides first on just to refresh the motivations of why we're doing this. We have seen kind of a market increase in the vulnerability of what I would call the authorization surface area of applications. If you've been tracking the OWASP top 10 from 2017 to 2021, broken access control went from number 5 on their top 10 list to number 1. And if you look at the API top 10 that just came out last year in 2023, number 1, number 3, and number 5 are all related to broken access control. We think that this is becoming a problem that is definitely worth addressing across the industry. And it's not that we don't have innovation in the authorization space. We have a lot of innovation. What we have is really a lack of standardization and a lack of similar ways of doing things. And we have a pattern now, the externalized access control pattern, that really hasn't kind of been done in a very consistent way. And last year, well, 2 years ago, and then last year again at Identiverse, we were all lamenting the fact that we don't have this. And we decided to do something about it. And so that's why we started the process to eventually get a working group. You know, there are a lot of different things that we could do here. We all said we haven't had our OpenID Connect moment for authorization yet. And that's what we really are aspiring to do. If you look at the authorization space, we have vendors, customers are struggling to try to get policy-based access control systems to interoperate. SaaS applications don't really have a way to insert a policy-based or externalized authorization system in the path of their authorization. And it's a really hard problem because authorization, unlike authentication, which happens once, and then you have an access token that's good for a certain amount of time, authorization tends to happen in the critical path of every application request. And so, you know, the architecture is a little bit more challenging. So there's a good reason why we haven't really made much progress here. And so that's the set of issues that we decided to tackle. David, do you want to add anything before?
Yep, I think we're good.
Great. I'm going to skip a couple of slides here because I think they were a little bit repetitive with respect to what we talked about last time. But let me talk a little bit about the progress that we've made. So we've set up a few deliverables here. Alex Babiano and Eve Mailer have been critical in, first of all, getting us to talk about use cases before rushing in to standardize anything. Thank you, Eve. And we have a document that describes the various ways in which applications do authorization today. Different models from just provisioning access control, you know, into each different system, to doing things at the network level or at a gateway level, and finally to doing enforcement at the application itself. We're trying to formalize some of these scenarios and use cases. Among that also, you know, is how do actually the authentication authorization system interact together. David has been working on work in that space in terms of how to think about rich authorization requests and how those interact with AuthZen. So one of our meta goals here is to create something that is not a stovepipe or a silo, but something that integrates with the rest of the ecosystem, the OpenID and the OAuth2 ecosystem. The second thing we've been working on is a set of API specifications. The first one being how a policy enforcement point, which is commonly an application or a gateway, would call out to a policy decision point. Again, use the XACML or the NIST parlance. A policy decision point is something that takes inputs like a subject and an action and a resource and gives you a decision. How exactly a set of compliant implementations would implement that protocol? And we've made good progress there. We've identified 4 types of APIs that we want to support. An API for a single request. So you send a request, you get back a response, a decision, true or false. A box card or multiple requests, which we're working on next. And then a couple of search APIs. Given a subject, what does that subject have access to? And given an object, which are the subjects that have access to that object? So those are the 4 types of use cases that we're tackling in that one specific API specification, the PEP to PDP API specification. In the future, we're going to work on the policy administration point, the policy decision point protocols, but that's further. We've made good progress, and we've challenged ourselves to define an interop scenario, which we did. We set a target for Identiverse for when we wanted to have a set of implementations come in and test against the spec, the payload formats that we've created. And I'm happy to report that we now have 4 interoperable implementations. We have thank you, Kata. The Acerto Topaz implementation. We have the Cerbos implementation. Cerbos is an ABAC open source engine. Topaz is a combination ABAC-REBAC open source engine. We now have the Cogito project, which is a open source rule engine. And as of this weekend, a tool worked hard into the night and got us a Signal implementation as well that's all compliant. And David is within what we call Epsilon from getting an Axiomatics compliant implementation as well. We have a few more that we expect to get by Identiverse. I believe Permit.io has one in the works. OPA will have one in the works, and there's potentially a scenario where we get one from Amazon, from AWS, from Cedar as well. So we feel like that's already pretty good progress, and by Identiverse, we feel like we'll have a lot of momentum. We'll do that event, and then we'll repeat it again at EIC.
And Amri, just to chime in, because the interop piece that I'm doing for Axiomatics is also based on Xactable, it's gonna make the other Xactable implementations interoperable. So ping authorized would be one, all the Z-Force would be one, AT&T Xactable would be one. So it's not, I'm doing it for Axiomatics, of course, but it's actually opening up the door to all of the other Xactable implementations.
Yeah, so we get 3 for the price of 1, which is exciting. Here's where to find us. We have obviously the mailing list. Feel free to join. We are doing all of our meeting notes in GitHub through a tool called HackMD. The spec itself, there's a URL there. Tool had a fantastic first draft with that, and we've been iterating off of that. And then finally, we have a Slack group as well. And I think that covered all of the updates here. But the interop scenarios in particular, we have a kind of a microsite that we've stood up that has the scenario, it has the request and response documents, and then it has results from the 4 interoperable implementations. I don't know if I'll go a little off script here, but let's see if I can if I can click the link here. Here's the little, I hope that people can see this. This is the microsite. It's even in the right color scheme. Here's the interop results. And if we go to the scenarios, we've defined 1 for a to-do application. This is the simplest scenario that we could think through. So we have the entire set of payloads documented here. And then finally, a set of results. So every one of these vendors so far has passed the test suite that we've created. And that is it for me. Any questions?
About 8 minutes for questions if we need it.
8 minutes for questions. We're fast here in Onsen. Yes.
You can tell me to go read the manual if necessary. How much of this covers authorizations for things that aren't people?
Great question. So subject can be really anything, and in terms of scope, we wanted to create something that where you could have a machine-to-machine or a service-to-service type of scenario as well. We've not, gone into great detail on specifying what a subject is. I think a tool, you have a PR to the spec that we still need to work through that will actually formalize the relationship between a subject.
So we are using the IDF subject identifier set for the subject, and so you can define that as a machine if you want. But we haven't specifically looked at use cases which are machine to machine. If there are different requirements there, that's not in this way. Thank you.
Other questions?
More of a comment.
That's good.
I said to Nat, isn't this crazy fast? That you have an interop profile of 4 implementations in 6 months?
Thank you so much. Yeah, we had a lot of energy around it, and we feel like initially we had a lot of conversation about scope, and to the credit of the co-chairs, David in particular, and the rest, we all decided that kind of getting concrete progress, even on a very narrow scenario, would be would give us momentum. And so we chose to scope down what it is that we were doing. There was a lot of debate on the kind of the more general aspects of the specs, boxcaring and search and so on and so forth. Defining a small, narrow, familiar to-do scenario was actually critical to kind of unlocking progress.
I'll add, Omri, to what you said, the fact that there is a lot of prior art in this space that I guess deserve to be more well known. But what we did was discovery sessions. So the Cedar group presented how they do an authorization request and a response. Omri presented Topaz and how that works. I presented Alpha Zacmo and how that works, and so on and so forth. And when we compared our notes and the presentations, we were 95% the same. So it was just a matter of aligning and agreeing on how to make that 100% and then creating Alpha.
I guess two last questions. Are there any particularly important players you think are missing from the group hub right now that you'd like to see there? And any other asks on how the work group can cross the chasm to lead to adoption?
Yeah, I think importantly, the three cloud providers, I think would be fantastic to have. I think overall we're probably underrepresented on Zanzibar style authorization systems, revac authorization systems. We've been in contact with folks that build them. My company sort of builds one called Topaz, but we have one called OpenFGA that comes out of Okta and Auth0, and of course Google itself. There are a few others. So I would say that that's a place where we're weak. And getting, if we can get the AWS Cedar implementation to be part of the interop, I think that would be a big deal as well. So yeah, I would say that there's still a fair amount of distance to go before we declare any sort of success there. The other thing I would say is that getting more end users, customers involved is always good. We've had some voices that have been really good, to listen to in the working group, but we can have more of that. The tool has more to add.
By the way, shout out to Omri for doing a fantastic job of the interop. And I just wanted to comment that this interop, we are focused more on the sort of the PDP side of things, right? There is one application and we have multiple PDPs that can talk to that application. I think what will be really useful in the future is if we can also have variability on the application side where there are multiple applications, and those could even be like SaaS vendors or people who have nothing to do with authorization as of now, who could be participating.
Yeah, just to add a thought to that, our dream scenario is Salesforces and the ServiceNows of the world, the SaaS apps of the world that everyone uses every day, all day, could have a way to get an externalized authorization system involved in your authorization decisions. And I think that, there's a burden of proof. We need to spend a lot more time making sure that this thing is real, but that would be ultimately a fantastic goal. Yeah.
Yeah, so when I was in Australia last November, there was quite a bit of interest from the local community down there, but they were complaining that the meeting time is really cringy for them. So appetite to opening up another time zone meeting like Fabi working group and Connect working group does.
I think David can take that one. We just had a conversation at the last meeting.
Can you repeat the question because that wasn't very loud?
Yeah, so the question that asked was, there's an appetite in Australia to participate, and currently it's very difficult to optimize for the 3 zones in the world. We have a fair number, obviously a fair number of attendees in this time zone, and then some in Europe. We have a couple in Australia that right now that time is brutal. David, you had a proposal that I think we were going to follow.
Yeah.
Through. Can you talk through that?
I'm going to send out a poll where I'm going to put 3 proposals forward. Proposal number 1 would be to just stay as is, right? No changes. We keep the meeting as it is. Proposal number 2 would be we keep the meeting as it is and we add another one that is more conducive to Australia. So a second time. The third proposal would be to move the current time to a time that is more conducive to Europe, I'm sorry, and then create another one for APAC. And I'm sorry that for the first proposal was not to not do anything, it was to alternate between week 1 would be Pacific time, let's say, week 2 would be APAC time. So I'll send a survey out, we'll see what people come back with. Right now, the bulk of the individuals are in the Americas. We do have a few individuals in Europe and a few individuals in APAC, and definitely if we had better times, it probably would help others join the group.
So we're definitely dealing with that question for those. Thank you for asking that. Well, with that, I'll pass it on to Mike.
Good afternoon. I'm Mike Jones. And I'm here to speak about some of the progress we've made in the OpenID Connect working group, also known historically as the Artifact Binding Working Group, because that's what we started working on. And I promise you'll get to see some new content here. This is not just slides that you've seen before. So, what are we doing? We've created the OpenID Connect protocol, enabling login and logout. Most of you know about that, I'm sure. Historically, we incubated the OpenID Connect for identity assurance work that eventually migrated into its own working group, which you'll hear about today. We're working on the OpenID Federation protocol to enable trust establishment among cooperating parties. We likewise have been the place that the OpenID for verifiable credentials specs have been incubated. And in fact, most of them are still officially there, although there's the plan to transfer those as they become implementers draft to the digital credentials protocols working group, just as we did with eKYC IDA once upon a time. There's a list of specs at this URL, which you can go see, but I'll talk about some of them. We got a lot of final specs. OpenID Connect Core and some of its friends were the first over 10 years ago now. The logout stuff came along. We said how to migrate from OpenID 2 to OpenID Connect, and that got used. Torsten wrote an unmet authentication requirements error code spec, probably the smallest final spec. George and others wrote the initiating user registration via OpenID Connect spec, but we still got a lot of stuff underway. OpenID Federation continues improving both in its exposition and its functionality. The OpenID for VC specs you'll hear about in another presentation shortly, including there's some affiliated stuff. Claims aggregation is still out there. The native SSO for mobile apps is an implementer's draft, but we haven't decided whether it's time for it to be final. There's a lot going on. So what's happened since we last met our heroes in October? We published the second errata set for the OpenID Connect specs. That was more work than most of you probably thought it would be, because after 10 years, people had found all kinds of things that they might have said differently or that were just wrong. You know, simple things like places where HTTP : appeared, where HTTPS was supposed to be there, etc. But we got that done in December. That was the basis of submitting to the International Standards Organization, ISO, what's called publicly available submission drafts for ISO to republish, which I'll talk about on the next slide. We got the first implementer's draft of OpenID for VCI. Yay. That provides a basis for moving that draft when the chairs are ready or in the working group. We've published a number of OpenID Federation drafts. Most of the updates have been editorial, but some of the editorial work has been substantial. For instance, Vladimir Duzhinov single-handedly rewrote all of the policy operators descriptions to be much more rigorous in terms of describing the syntax inputs and outputs. And we've published multiple OpenID for VC drafts of the various specs, again, which I'm not going to describe here. So a standard question in these working group presentations is, what are the challenges and the opportunities facing the working group right now? Well, both some of the challenges and opportunities come from OpenID Federation being in production use in several jurisdictions or nearly there. And we're having the kind of good concrete discussions that come from real deployers saying, these parts are working great for me. This part is not. What are we going to do? And this is exactly the kind of feedback that a decade ago helped us improve Connect to be the solid piece of work that it landed as. There's also ongoing discussions about the relationships between digital wallet initiatives, national identity systems worldwide, and trust establishment. If you want to have a topic at IIW about that, I know there's a number of people in the room that would be glad to do so. This is all new. You've never seen this before. There are ISO spec numbers assigned for OpenID Connect. Yay. For those of you who aren't aware, why would we bother doing this? There's a number of jurisdictions around the world where they are legally required to use specifications from treaty organizations, that mostly being ISO or ITU, wherever they're applicable. And so to the extent that we want OpenID Connect to be used in some of those jurisdictions, it's a help to them and to us to have them be able to use an ISO spec, which is exactly the same as our specs. So Nat, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe this is in a 5-month ISO balloting period. We haven't heard any indications that there's negative ballots or things we're going to have to address. It could happen, but we expect probably not this quarter, but early next quarter, those to get published as ISO documents. So what are some of the deliverables on our roadmap? We want to have the last implementer's draft of OpenID Federation within weeks. We put in a big push to address all the substantive things that we thought had to happen. I think we're on track to do that. As I already talked about, the ISO pass specifications should be published within a few months. And we intend to have a final Federation spec by the end of the year. The other thing that's new, because of when we are, is we're now 10 years into having final OpenID Connect specs. And the foundation has been running a series of celebrations and planning them for that event. A really fun get-together and conversation was had, especially with including Japanese developers, giving their perspectives on how we succeeded and what that looked like. Those of you who will be at Identiverse or EIC, there will likewise be celebration events there. You can read the materials from the first one on my blog. If you search for 10th, you'll find it easily. So during the celebrations, we didn't want to just, shake our pom-poms and say, hooray for us. We wanted to actually look back and see, okay, how did we achieve the success that we achieved? Why did it succeed when I've been involved in things that have failed too? You learn things from that as well. And what lessons did we learn along the way? And I will say that the capsule summary of the lessons, all but one of the developers in Japan said the fact that we tried to keep simple things simple helped it go. Also, repeated interop testing was critical to getting it right. We did 5 rounds of interop testing. And guess what? After every round, we substantially changed the specs. We did not make breaking changes for no reason, but if developers were saying, this isn't working for me, we even took features out. I feel good about that. Finally, and this is not 10 years old, but it's getting there, certification enables an interoperable ecosystem of implementations. Unless you test, you probably aren't going to interoperate. Now, fast forward, what does the digital wallet space look like? Well, certainly going to be need for interop testing and certification there, but I'm ahead of myself. So last slide, I was hoping to get a sense from any of you here what you'd like to be accomplishing at IIW on behalf of this work or the working group, or work that you'd like to have possibly injected into the working group. Anyone want to advertise any sessions they know or think they may be having now?
I have more of a question. Is anyone carrying a card for Federation?
Is anyone carrying the card for Federation? Meaning having a session? We probably should. John's running away. John, don't run away. I will involve you, like it or not. And then finally, just logistically, we're obviously not going to have the working group call today. And I'm skeptical of holding the 7 a.m. call on Thursday. That said, if people have topics that are burning a hole in their mental itinerary that they want to talk about on Thursday, we could keep it. But if I don't hear any cries to keep it in a day or so, we'll let it go. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So let me just take a few minutes talking about the FAPI working group update. There are not so many news. By the way, do you guys know what's FAPI? Not that much. Quarter of the room, I guess. So FAPI used to stand for financial grade API. It's now just FAPI, standing for, well, it's not standing for, but it's meant for high security API protection mechanism, which is usable for any industry, although it's primarily used in the financial industry right now. In Norway, it's being used in the healthcare industry though, and the application is steadily increasing. So it's a profile of auth. So when you wanted to deploy auth securely, one of the best way is to use FAPI because it's got the mathematical formal proofs for its security property as well. You can be assured to some extent, under the assumptions of the security model that it is safe. So the objective of the working group was to create general purpose, high quality security profiles for OpenID Connect and all. And like I said, it uses extensible use of formal verification. And we do have close collaboration with national regulators and associations. And for example, Australia, Brazil, UK, in the US, we're liaising with FDX, KSA, Canada, and in some cases, like in Australia, they are sponsoring FAPI2 security analysis, which is really good. And also we are writing, unlike most of the OpenID Foundation specs are written in the IETF-like language, but in this case, we're trying to use ISO directive compliant language so that it can be easily translated and also adopted. And we do have national level certifications going on all over, and the map is actually kind of indicating that kind of things, like Brazil, Australia, Saudi Arabia, UK all has national certification scheme, which I think Joseph is going to talk about later today. And the breadth is expanding. These days, we are getting inquiries from those countries like Chile and Colombia for the certification, so on and so forth. So our adoption is increasing. Let's move. Moving on. Okay. And we have a bunch of published specifications. FAPI 1.0 series of specification has been final for a couple of years now, and we are diligently working on FAPI 2 series of specifications, which is listed here as FAPI 2 security profile and TACA model, FAPI 2 message signing, and grant management for 2.0. Also, we have a specification which can be used for both FAPI 1 and FAPI 2 called FAPI Client Initiated Bichannel Authentication. The acronym is CIBA profile as well. And all of these are implemented as draft. We do have white papers as well for those who are not really techie, but still want to understand what these are. We have two white papers, Open Banking, Open Data, and Financial Grade API, which was published in 2022, and the follow-up that, Open Banking and Open Data, ready to cross borders in 2023. And there's formal analysis and certifications as well. Now, roadmap. It's always aspirational. Q2 this year. We wanted to do it in Q1 this year, but when we announced that we are going to be moving to final, a bunch of questions and change requests or clarifications started coming to the respective specifications, which is good, actually.
Yeah, that's good.
That's really good. They are really implementing it, beating it, and finding the issues. So we are having a steady, we've been having steady inflow of these issues. Now it's been, coming to the end. I think, well, I don't think we have seen new issues for the last couple weeks, which is good. So we are slowly winding down that process. So hopefully Q2 this year, we should be able to move to final for the FAPI 2.0 security profile. And following that, hopefully we can do that same for the message signing. So that's it. Any questions? Yes. Microphone.
Nat. Here's the question, a little bit political. So about a month ago, the CFPB was speaking at, I believe it was an FDS conference about certifying standards organizations for open banking, and finding the right one. So I was curious if you guys as a working group or as the overall organization are having conversations with them, so that they know what FOPI is. And if they go down this route sometime this year, because it sounded like they were looking to do, would be able to certify or go through some sort of process with CFPB.
Maybe.
Maybe
Joseph?
Gail.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Joseph, first, I'll go.
Well, Nat, do you want me to butt in actually?
Mark,
Yeah, so we have indeed been having various conversations. I think the set so far is you've been responding to consultation from CFPB, as you've hopefully seen through the blog post which contained our formal response there. And I believe has also been having ongoing conversations with various people in FDX about this. As it happens, there's a small group of us which are looking at adding another blog post to the conversation to help clarify a particular point. So I don't want to go into details of that because it's very much a work in progress at the moment, but we are absolutely engaging in those very important conversations and making sure that the OpenID Foundation is present at the table, if you see what I mean. I would also ask Joseph if there's anything else he might like to add, because he's been quite key in the liaison with the FDX.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So yeah, Mike Flores and myself were actually out at the FDX summit last month, I think in Washington, and got to see the Chopra speech firsthand. There were a couple of interesting reactions in the room, shall we say. But yeah, we've been working very closely with FDX for a couple of years now. Yeah, we're talking with CPFB to see if we should be registering as a standards organisation or not. It's not clear if they just want the full end-to-end organisations like FDX, or if they're willing to take an organisation that does just the security standard. But yeah, there's ongoing conversations there. We've also had conversations with the regulators in Canada. We're still working to hear exactly what Canada's thinking, but yeah, the rumours we heard were that they would endorse FAPI in some way.
good. So I'll just add that we're not trying to do anything new and special in the US compared to how the OpenID Foundation supports other countries around the world. And I think we're at the order of 10 or 12 that have selected FAPI so far. So it kind of starts with you as an ecosystem, and it could be government-led or private sector-led. You as an ecosystem, here's what FAPI is. Here's why it might be useful for you, right? Why it could add value to solve your use cases. And that's just like informational, educational, supportive, right, in their due diligence. And then if they select our FAPI security profile, then how can we help them as an ecosystem? And the way that countries, as governments or as private entities, that could be no touch, right? They could just use stuff that's publicly available and have absolutely no support from us whatsoever. Or that can go all the way up to a strategic relationship like we have with some of the markets like Brazil. So in the US at the moment, the board direction is to do exactly the same thing, right? Here are our certifications. We've had a couple of conversations with the CFPB to explain like how they work, what our role is, how we work with other countries to date, what best practices we've observed, to share that in publicly available comments. And we've also sought to collaborate with FDX as a potential private sector-led ecosystem, and to collaborate with them just like we have with other managing entities in other jurisdictions. And so, we remain as open door as ever with FTX to collaborate and come up with an appropriate strategic relationship or whatever the right model might be. And the same thing with the CFPB to make sure that we're supporting them and what they're hoping to achieve for American residents. So no specific change, but happy to take the question offline if that would help. Any other questions on it? All right, thank you. And thank you very much, Nat.
Thank you.
Joseph will talk a little bit more about the deployments we're doing around the world later. Might be of interest to at least some of you around quite how fast that's being picked up. I think we have 3 countries, the UAE, Chile, and Colombia, that just in the last quarter have selected FAPI, and some of them are already written into the regulations. So we're really seeing that take off around the world. Over to Bjorn.
Thank you, Gail. So I'm Bjorn, I'm the co-chair of the Moderna Working Group. So again, the working group was founded as a originating out of the mobile network operators community. And initially it was intended to support standards to enable MNOs to be identity provider open, OP provide OP, and also support identity services. The group has evolved to be a conjugate of MNOs interest. I'll cover some of those in the outreach part of the presentation. So we have one final specification. It's CBA core. It was a draft that started in the working group based on a Orange and Telefonica use case, and based on some of the conversation with FAPI, it was evolved into what we now call CBA core. And as you saw the FAPI profile, FAPI presentation, there is a FAPI profile of the CBA core. Implementation drafts, we have the Moderna authentication profile. So that is the way you interact between the user and the OP for a MNO. We have a spec called account porting. And so one of the requirements was that you would port your account with a mobile network operator to another operator, just like you port your phone number to another operator. The way the spec was written was that it is not specific to a phone number. It could be porting an email account as well. And then we have a user question API. It is very similar to CBA core. It is just a different way of interacting with the user. It was something that Orange were deploying for some other use cases. Specification under development is, again, it's the Moderna CBA profile. So just like FAPI, the Moderna has a CBA profile of the CBA core. We have a discovery profile where in the use case that the RP is discovering who the MNO is, in this case, the OP. And then we have the registration profile. Again, it's the client registration profile with added of a software statement. And with the CBA core going final, and it was partly driven by deployment in Brazil, we have an errata to the CBA core based on issues that have been open, and a core extension based on a eKYC IDA use case. So again, the working group has been moving forward with the discovery profile to get into implement this draft, and it's ready for working group review. Besides that, it's working on creating a draft for the errata and the extension of CBA. There is also a intent to create an ITF draft for the registration based on the CBA core specification. And then there's some additional discussions with external organizations based on use cases that they have, and they decided to create a OpenID Connect profile within their own organization rather than deferring to the OpenID Foundation to maintain the profile. I mentioned the outreach. So an evolution of some of the GSMA work was something called the Camara project. It is a Linux Foundation project, and it intends to develop APIs to expose network functionality. And so rather than what was designed for Mobile Connect to offer a defined set of services, these are just APIs per attributes. And so the foundation has a liaison agreement with the Camara to assist them in their work because they decided to base their APIs on OpenID Connect as well as the CBAC core specification. Particularly the identity consent management special projects and the know your customer special projects aligns with the work within the foundation. Again, the know your customer is obviously related to the KYC IDA group, and we've had a couple of presentations with their with their group to educate them about what the ECAPS ID offers and encourage them to leverage that specification. In terms of the identity and consent management, again, there is a back and forth conversation going on where the profile should be developed, and also a evolving understanding of what OpenID Connect and CBA actually is. There is a varying degree of knowledge within Camara. I mentioned GSMA. So early on, GSMA was a member of the foundation. As COVID hit, they had a change in their organization and their resources were changed. So we have started a process of establishing a formal relationship with GSMA, partly because if you're not a member of GSMA, then you don't have access to some of their work. And the reason why this aligns with the Camara project is because it's a close relationship between what Camara is doing and what GSMA is doing in terms of Open API Gateway project. And so in order to kind of bridge the gap of how OpenID Connect is leveraged within Camara as well as GSMA, we're in the process of establishing that liaison agreement. Again, as our IPR policy is slightly different from GSMA, so that's why it hasn't been finalized yet. Besides that, again, we have a liaison agreement with ETSI. So ETSI is a European telecom standards organization. It's been responsible for some of the cryptography that we have on SIM cards. They've worked on some of the virtualization standards for a mobile network. And we established this liaison based on some of the work that is now in DCP. So they started doing some work on EU wallet. And so there was a request to establish this agreement with ETSI to bridge the gap between the work the foundation is doing and what ETSI was doing. Again, this relationship is not confined to the EU wallet, but that is the starting point for the agreement. So as there are other areas that they're commonality, the agreement will be revised. But that was the starting point for the agreement. Okay, so to the roadmap. Again, I mentioned that the Discover profile is ready for working group review. The CBAC profile is just waiting behind the Discover profile. As I mentioned, the liaison agreement, again, is an aspiration because now we're talking about legal aspects and they usually takes a bit longer. So defining that as a deliverable is maybe too aspirational. So again, I mentioned the active engagement with Camara. And we're doing a lot of knowledge transfer. Again, it's my hope would have been that they were deferred to the foundation, similar to the way our relationship with GSMA was when we developed some of the modern aspects. There's unfortunately, if it's not invented here, it doesn't matter. And so, but there's also a varying degree of OpenID Connect, and just because you read a spec doesn't mean you understand it. And that is very true for OpenID Connect and to some degree OAuth too. So We've had some very interesting conversation and circle conversation where we eventually come down to what they actually are trying to ask and what their understanding of the various specification, including CBOM. So I mentioned the INA draft. That is, and what the INA profile is. Part of what is holding up the registration profile is some discussion with FAPI that there was some intent to do DCR in FAPI. And we wanted to align what we're doing in client registration from Moderna with what FAPI was working on. And finally, the CBR data and the extension. Again, it is more about collecting additional insight and issues before moving those to a formal draft. And yes.
Speak to the ITU. What is it?
Sure. So, Gail asking about the ITU. So, as you saw on the Connect presentation, there is a work to, I wouldn't say transfer, but add the OpenID Connect suite of specifications to the ISO using a pass process. Because again, there are countries that requires a formal or a old world SDO to publish something in order to be part of the requirements. And so ITU being a telecom standards organization, again, there's an effort to do the same thing that we did with ISO. So we're just starting a work to transfer to using a similar pass process to allow the ITU to publish the OpenID Connect specifications as well as the CBA core specification. There are some discussion to add additional profiles like FAPI and possibly KYC IDA, because there is discussion within ITU this past week about attributes. And so that's where I think KYC IDA specification would fit in. So we just starting that work. I did not add those to this slide, but it's fresh off from the press. So, but we're going down the same path as we do with ISO and following the similar process with the ITU to do the same thing. So again, different countries have different requirements. It's either ISO or it may be ITU, depending on the regulatory environments or even the service industry. So. So if there's any other questions, so I'm going to hand it up to Christina. No questions. Okay. Tina, all yours.
Thank you. Wake up, folks. I see you on their emails. Wake up. Let's talk about digital credentials protocols working group. And so yeah, it's used to be the newest. Now that title has gone to autumn. Congratulations. Basically, we cover this new digital credentials world. So issuance of credentials from issuer to the wallet, presenting credentials from wallet to the verifier, underlying security and trust. And because it's based on OAuth, is a framework, as much as people say, you know, how they implement it, we also do define interoperability profiles, which supposed to guarantee interoperability off the shelf. So first thing first, please welcome our new working group co-chair, Josephina. Yeah, I find it fascinating that Thorsten is in Seattle now and I flew from Berlin. We're very grateful for Joseph to stepping up. It's been very helpful, so thank you very much. So I think there were some conversations on the additional time slots. Our working group added an additional slot on, which is, I don't call it APAC friendly, I call it New Zealand friendly.
But yeah, we have 2 calls now, every week. And those calls have very good attendance. I think New Zealand friendly call, turned out to be friendly for Americans who like to sleep. So, yeah, I mean, what? Noon is always better than 7 a.m., I guess. So, yeah, progress. For the issuance specification, we have a first implementer's draft. Woo! I don't know, I don't get like a lot of, enthusiasm when I say this first implementer's draft, but it took us a long time to get there, so it's actually huge. And a lot of implementers have been waiting, so we do expect, conversions around this version of the draft. Concurrent tests, gonna quickly report on the progress.
Yeah, so I'll talk about this a bit later as well, but we have been working on the OpenID for verifiable presentations conformance test for a while now. So we've had an ST job VC there for a while, testing the wallet. We've had quite a few wallets tests with that, but we also relatively recently added the ISO 1813-7 MDL profile. So that's the mobile driving licenses profile of verifiable presentations. And again, we've already had a bunch of wallets go through those tests and had some feedback and fixed some issues they found, and they fixed some issues we found in their implementations, I think. So, yeah.
Yeah, so just this morning, we got this question. What are you testing for conformance if it's a framework? And yep, we have profiles. Progress on the presentation side, we have started preparing the third implementers draft, partially, to give a stable version to ISO, but also because we do have some significant normative updates. So one is this new request URI extension, which basically allows the wallets to communicate their capability to the verifiers, so verifiers can prepare a request tailored to that wallet. Yeah, wallets were starting to do something shady, so after 300 comments on the PR, we finally have a mechanism people agree on, so that's good. Surprisingly, we did not have a stage of VC profile in the specs, and now that's added, which is good. There was a PR in progress on how to do maybe for VP over the browser API, which is a work happening in collaboration with Southwest 3C. We do expect open conversations at IW on this topic. The goal is to solve mainly 2 problems. One is prevent the usage of custom URL schemes, which do not allow the user choice for the wallets and could end up in security vulnerabilities, because pretty much any wallet that registers the same custom URL schemes can be opened. And also addressing cross-device security concerns, hopefully. Yeah. And
that also solves some UI user experience issues as well, we hope. By if the user has multiple wallets, they'll get a better idea of which credentials from which wallets might fit the request.
Yep. And also there has been implementation feedback coming in on the query language in the presentation, so we have been taking steps to address that for sure. For the implementations, we were trying to update the slide, we kind of lost track of implementations. I think the biggest news is end of April, beginning of May, one is the largest large-scale pilot that they do full potential is doing an intro testing. All the tracks use OpenID for VC protocols. So that's basically issuance of MDoc, issuance of SDJOT, presentation of MDoc, presentation of SDJOT, VC. Over 100 companies are registered. So yeah, I think that's the biggest moving piece right now. Yeah, and increasing pressure on the conformance test team to make sure these 100 companies have a conformance test to help them interoperate. Yeah, is that? Yeah, okay.
So in terms of what we're doing next, we've got more work planned on the issuance spec. So there's a PR already open to update the batch API to deal with issuing copies of credentials. So the idea there is that you'll be able to have multiple credentials held by the wallet. It's the same credential but signed with different signatures, which means the verifiers won't be able to tell that it's the same credential that being potentially being presented with when you're doing selective disclosure. So it avoids what we call linkability. And we're also making some updates to the terminology used in the specification to make the terminology work better. Now we have that concept of multiple instances of a single credential. On the verifiable presentation spec, we're going to continue and complete this browser API discussions that we've been doing with the WICG group at W3C. And we're going to look at how to address all this implementer feedback we've had for the query language. So we've had a lot of feedback about query language, not necessarily all in the same direction. So we need to have a good conversation with the implementers about what we can do to improve it, hopefully without causing massive breaking changes for people that have already implemented it. We've heard there's already 100 plus of them. So we also plan to extend the conformance test. So again, these EU interop events, they have some new profiles. We're going to do our best to support them in their timescales so that we can get all those 100 companies hopefully trying to run the conformance tests. Continue to support the EU as one of the leading adopters of all these specs through that EIDAS. So, probably some evolution of the high assurance interoperability profile, and we'll continue to have conversations with NEST and support them on their work with verifiable credentials as well. Yes, we have a question.
I'll finish my I believe the California DMV has interest in having some hackathon support from the GCP working group. As co-chairs, do you think that it would be possible for the working group to support the California DMV in a hackathon type piece of work, subject to further discussion?
Yeah, of course. We always support everyone. More implementer feedback, the better, basically. And yeah, hopefully we can maybe get them through the conformance tests as well. So, yeah, definitely.
Are there any more questions?
What are you doing this week? Call sessions you're calling?
What do we do at IOW? So there'll be definitely a discussion about the query language, I think. We've got more discussions about the browser API.
Do you know who's calling those sessions? Do people look out for them?
Top of my head, I think Oliver probably called at least one. Yeah, Tim's called one. He's putting his hand up. Yeah, and obviously we've also got a in-person workshop back here at Google on Friday morning. Hopefully, if you would like to come to that, you've already registered. But if not, get in touch with us and see if we can get you on the list. But yeah, we've got 3 hours there, so we should hopefully make a good bit of progress on some of the outstanding items.
It's a working group meeting.
Yes, it's a working group meeting.
I have one other ask.
So I know there will be several useful discussions, and I know both the W3C and the YCG community group that Tim's co-chairing and the DCP effort you're co-chairing, that we're trying to figure out what type of liaison structure would make sense. So as the work progresses this week, we look forward to your feedback. So if we need formal paper between the various working groups and community groups, we can support you in that.
I think the last DCP working group call, the conclusion was, let's just be nicer to each other. People are like, that's how FIDO and W3C works. They're being nice to each other. So if W3C and IDF can be nice to each other. I'm partially joking, partially it's truth. But yeah, I think IW trying to move the needle on the big topics. But we do have a lot of somewhat technical issues that still need to be nailed down, like the credential identifier stuff, whatnot. So yeah, I think we'll try to focus on that on Friday, ideally. But if people are interested in starting on the during the IW, yeah, always open. So it's usual suspects. Yeah, I'm sure you know how to find the usual suspects.
Yeah, and we hope to have at least one of the chairs of the WICG group at the Friday morning meetings.
They're not gonna stop calling you co-chair, Tim.
Might be there, we scheduled what about them first. Wasn't talking about you.
Right, any more questions, complaints? Blackmail? All right, go Tim, next.
Thank you. All right, hi everyone. Thank you. Since last time I was here, I joined Okta in January, so I'm no longer here for Microsoft. And I'm gonna give you a quick update on shared signals with the tool. So not the right button. There. Quick recap of what shared signals is trying to solve, right? As we're familiar, authentication happens at the time of login and then oftentimes drops, right? There's no other evaluation unless you're doing something proprietary. A lot of folks do some back channeling and their SDK talks back to their services, but there really hasn't been an interoperable way to do this today. So that was one of the things that shared signals set out to address. The work started really around accounts, right? Like account property changes, account disabled, password change, all those kind of things. And then 19. That was right. Okay. 2019, a tool proposed starting to look at kind of the zero trusty stuff, like actual sessions. So the idea is you can talk about sessions, end users, their devices, accounts, and the idea of having continuous monitoring and being able to share that signal across different security domains. That's the key, right? There really hasn't been a great way to do this across organizations, across tenants and those kind of things. So that's really what this work is set out to do. The way the specs kind of line up, the stuff at the top in red/orange are the OpenID pieces, right? So the shared signals framework, which is currently in implementers draft 2, is essentially a profile of a bunch of IATF work with some extra things on top, like a management API. So if you look all the way at the bottom, the things we all know and love, JSON Web Tokens, JSON Web Keys, JSON Web Encryption. Then on top of that are security event tokens, which are profiles of JSON Web Tokens. And then on top of that, you have some delivery methods, right? So push-based set, which is essentially webhooks, and then pull-based set, which is like a long pull. And then a really important piece of this is subject identifiers, which just recently in the past year, RFC 9493. That's how you actually describe the subject you're interested in. Shared signals, as I mentioned, profile all of those and really adds on top semantics and how you actually subscribe to an event, right? So if I am interested in just a user, I can use a subject identifier of email or a subject claim from a token, or I can go crazy and say, I am interested in this session for this user on this device in this tenant, right? So you can do a compound subject. So that was something that came out of the shared signals group to be able to provide this flexibility. And you can also go in the complete opposite direction and do a wildcard and just say, I'm interested in all events about all subjects for this specific event. So it's super, super flexible. At the top are CAPE and risk. You can think of these as just dictionaries. Like we probably should just find a way to rename them to dictionaries. There would actually define these events, what the contents are, what are required fields, all the normal stuff you'd see in an event dictionary. So CAPE are the more zero trust session stuff, and risk is more of the account-based stuff. The nice thing is new profiles can be added at any time for specific use cases, right? There's been some discussions with some of the financial folks about having a finance specific set of events. And we can do that. The one thing we're working through is how do we make that process easier? These are currently normal specs, so they have to go through the normal OpenID Foundation process, which for the core spec is a good thing. For the event spec, it makes it very challenging to add in additional events. So we want to see if we can find a way to speed that up while still keeping the rigor of the process.
Yeah, I put the shout out, skim events on top of this as well.
Oh yeah, right. And that's defined in IATF, correct? Skim events, yeah, correct. Yeah, so skim events is a work item in the skim working group at IATF that's really using shared signals as almost like a protocol operation protocol of POV to actually make some of these things work inside skim. So that's another example of other organizations taking advantage of it. Two administrative updates. We have 2 additional chairs that were added. So Shane Mill from Cisco and Sean Odell from Disney. They were just November before Christmas, right? Yeah, just last quarter. They were added in. They've been huge contributors to the specs and are now
going to help us out. And as part of that, we decided to just take a quick opportunity to more formally split up the work. This group doesn't really have the traditional editor chair split. So we're all kind of editors and chairs. So we figured we would split this up. In my new role, I'm not going to be doing as much with the implementation of this. So I decided to take on finishing Kate and liaising with other standards bodies that I'm involved in. Atul is working on the interop specification, which we'll talk about in a second, and also working with the certification program with Joseph. Shane is going to be working on taking the core framework over to final. It's currently implementers draft 2, and Sean is working on a net new document, which is some use cases which will help implementers. Activities, I'm not going to read through all these. We're obviously here at IHW. There's also Identiverse and EIC. I believe we have at least 2 sessions at Identiverse on this, maybe 3, and I believe 1 at EIC. Don't quote me on that, but lots of interest. We keep having some of these events reaching out to do these sessions too, which is a really good sign. And most of the focus right now is getting, from the spec standpoint, continuing to get SSF over the finish line. We really need to get the final draft in the next year. Not going to read through these either. These are mostly updates from the past year, but you can look at these when the deck goes out. Lots of industry buzz around this. Also not going to read this. This is for your reference. Lots of work going on. One of the things I'll use as an opportunity to highlight. One of the things we've been thinking about is how do we do backwards compatibility between drafts, which is like a very religious topic. So we did end up adding a version claim to the metadata. Is that correct? Yes. To invite folks to implement without worrying about breaking their configuration completely when the next implementer's draft comes out. Especially some of these that draw out for multiple years, we can't expect people to completely break when we update. And we also don't want to limit the types of changes we can make in the implementer's drafts. So this is just for reference when you get the deck. And then Atul's going to talk about the interoperability event last month in London.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So yeah, we had a very good interoperability event in London that was hosted by Gartner in their IAM Summit. And what we started with was trying to define an interoperability profile for the specification, but we kind of gave up on the bigger claim of trying to define an interoperability specification for a whole of shared signals. We just focused on the particular events that we would like to interoperate on. And so we left the mechanisms a little open. It's not that we did not use the shared signals framework. We used shared signals, but we did not mandate certain features to be implemented in the shared signals framework. Right. So what we did was we, sort of focused on those events and focused on the business use cases. And so what we had was real products like, SailPoint had the real implementation, and it was able to, using the session revoked event, effect changes in SailPoint, and so did all of the other participants in the interop. And we had a demo which involved the Apple implementation, but we are not allowed to use their logo on this. So but we were able to show that in the actual demo at the session. So just to give you a sense of the interoperability, so we all sort of all those who participated either as a transmitter or a receiver are here. They all sort of met the interoperability criteria. We have a sort of a Google Drive folder of all the sort of logs and all that for the interoperability. And here you see all of us just working with our laptops on a table for doing the interop. And then we had a great response. We had 3 sessions just for people to come and see the interoperable implementations, and it was really successful. So thank you.
Do you think you'll do it again?
So there have been some very positive, sorry, the question was, will this happen again? Will we be doing it again? So there have been some very positive indications about that, but I don't have confirmation yet. So I would fully expect it. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, just how to participate. Easiest way is to go to openid.net/shared signal. Everything we do is on GitHub. All the notes are there. We use HackMD as well, so super easy to get engaged and join the calls. Are we still bi-weekly or weekly?
Bi-weekly.
Bi-weekly on Tuesdays at 10 1 Eastern, 10 Pacific. Yeah.
While everybody else thinks about their questions, we're ahead of time, so you can definitely
Oh,
ask.
this is where
questions.
usually we're cleanup.
I
Usually we
know,
have to speed through.
yeah, we got extra time, so please think of your questions for Tool and Tim. In the meantime, my question to Tim, to Tool, was a bit of a trick question, which is that Gartner had indicated they were interested in doing a session in December, so we needed to kind of debrief on how this had gone, reconnect with that team and confirm if they would do so. But obviously, having a session in December in Dallas would be much more convenient for the North American stakeholders, like some of you folks in the room. So that would be great, to give us the time to prepare those profiles, to help the implementers progress and have more of those interfaces and signals ready to interoperate. The other point I was going to make, because I don't think Sean's on the line with us, who's writing the white paper, is that subject to the board approval later today, then we'll be able to race ahead with a white paper that will address, like Tim said, the use cases, which we think is what executives need to hear and what implementers need to hear is what you can really use this stuff for, but crucially also how to cross the chasm, right? How to enable these standards to be pervasively deployed across implementations at massive scale. So I think having the white paper as a tool to bring together everybody's thinking into a safe space on how we do that in practice could be really interesting. So we know that the NSA and NIST and CISA, for example, think these are really promising standards, but they want to see the wider spread industry adoption. But the boot's also on the other foot, right? What are they doing to incorporate into their contracts, expectations that one has conformed to the tests and to the standards that we're making available? So how do we drive the flywheel and the network effects of adoption? So I think it's an exciting time for sharing signals. Any other questions from the floor?
And that just triggered a reminder. I was poking around the developer docs for login.gov for something completely unrelated. We found out they're actually using shared signals, which was really awesome. So they have they define their own event types, which is fine. The spec allows that, but we actually hope to maybe pull those into one of our specs once we get in touch with them. So that was exciting. We keep learning, looking for other things.
Cool.
The recent cybersecurity review board document did mention
Waiting for someone.
signals.
Not my problem.
It's a thing.
I know.
How is the shared signals working group engaging with the CSRB on that for the promotion of shared signals? Or are you?
Nothing yet. We have had talks with CISA in the past. I imagine we just need to keep expanding those, especially in light of the document directly calling out shared signals. So that was fairly recent. So,
Yeah,
but that's a good point. Yeah, this is the not so
Yeah,
for some companies.
not totally unrelated to that development, we have the University of Stuttgart actually doing a formal analysis of those
Right now.
right now. And the initial preliminary findings are very encouraging that, there's not much work for us, but so,
Yeah, so you've been joining the calls, keep pushing on us to have that conversation.
It hasn't been a call since the report.
No, that's what I'm saying, but you've been on the calls lately, so yeah. All right, thank you, everyone.
thank you.
Thanks. Quick break.
Oh, you have your own mic. This is gonna roll off and make very.
Until pick back up at 2:20, so just a little bit longer than 10 minutes.
Can you repeat that closer to the mic, Mike?
Schedule back up for those line if it's not in the deck already. So
Pardon?
do you have a slide for break to show people that are online that can break?
I just want to check, we didn't hear, what time is the event restarting?
Yeah, both of those panels at the end of today's session. I thought it was questions to run board members each and then a question. Lots of
That seemed better because that allows us to analyze it. That was a little bit of mistake on my part. Jamming the files together. Transition. So I'm just trying to maximize
I think it's okay. For the board meeting itself, we have the 4 or 5 decisions and then the rest is updates. So even if like the entire end of the deck is all the case, it's like a mess, it's more like a, it's a big.
220. That's why I said 220. Like I said, having a little extra time.
So I don't know if you have-
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks so much. Thanks.
It's on the agenda, but I've invited my other class to be the kind of- It's okay, like, it's gonna be- Because, I'm bringing it as a developer, who just uses a lot of those large language models to say, like, well, shall I implement with my connect with, JS? And we're saying, so it's all doing something about it. So just to.
So
bring in a developer view. Sorry?
I was wondering what is going to be AI thing. It's a.
Hold that thought, hold that thought. Hello, this is You too. Yeah. I'm so you have probably much to prepare for the chit chats with folks. What was on your mind this afternoon? Same thing.
Yeah, just in Toronto also. How.
I wish I had seen the question in a tentative way. Yeah, okay, if California goes down this path, would you be influenced from the? You know, I mean, there's every chance that the budget holds, and so then, well, I don't think it was disingenuous because I said, please go ahead and continue finding out how you're doing. I think part of the onus is on us by finding partners, resources to scale it, where to have it, all that stuff that can keep the cost down, so that's like fits within something.
Yeah.
Not us right now. I feel like out there. Overusing it, yeah, he's got cut back some stuff, so I can keep myself free, and so this is one of the things I'm keeping on my list, but I'm putting off some of the last one work.
Yeah.
So I just stretch my hours, so that when you're stretching hours, security.
Yeah, yeah, so I just want, it's fine if I'm working. Not, I don't feel like too much, right, but at this point, I was looking at my hours, I feel like I'm the hours.
I think that could remind me, I've done a turn on this page.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I'll be a little last.
Yeah, Friday. Yeah, Thursday.
So I've been fine.
Yeah, I think that's why I didn't kind of
After board dinner tonight, I'm like, trying to my nose because it's more likely accepting the phone call and I have a little bit of free. But also the other work is one of the sidebar things. Meet up. For example. I've already. And then you need the, they're like a line. Yeah. And then. Them, like, and then other nonprofits to be like, oh, what is this? And my, oh, thank you for the little chit chat with the security team. I mean, so Shayla, I'm sorry, Lucy, Nancy, you haven't met before. Member of our, yes, Nancy's a sister on my, Lucy and I are working together on some California DMV stuff. You might have seen her, but yeah, we're working on some things like hackathons. You're aware of California's work on mobile drive license. You're exploring how would we approach California DMV, either led or partnered hackathon type of thing. And we think that many friends attending will probably show interest. And so we're going to work out who you want to like have little sidebar chats with, like yourself, to say whether you want to, you know, look at the full idea. Oh yes, oh yes, and at least those two, and then I think it's speaking of the pleasure. It's max. We already have it. It's full fashion because it's what's already in the question. So I think that's good. It's just a question. Sorry, I'm just like related how you're exploding with knowledge. Yeah, so there is nothing to officially react to because it's ready to be brought to players like the OpenID Foundation board to react to. So right now, all we have is on two sides, some funds set aside in good intentions for interop events, including something on digital identity, and then that with possible interest. And so if those two things come together, as of course your architect and it does, then great. But it wouldn't, yeah. So we need to come back and who's what would the lighting be, who signs off on it, you've seen strategic passports, forward, whatever. I kind of figured in it, plan has passed by the way, but I'm not gonna keep parking up in the and I've been working on the clothes and just close isolate, so I'm not really and it's a little, it's a thing in the team, right? Like we're trying to close major contracts and stuff, and there's a lot of pressure on budget in the DMV. So it's a big ask for a state government to tailor its policies to a private sector entity, not the other way around, which I tried twice to get it to legal that they should just follow our NDA, and they don't pick up their pen. And so I'm like, I don't have the capacity to even try and choose a legal to try and do it myself. It's like, oh. I mean, we're far enough along that I don't know that we will need it. Right. Yeah, I think you and others need a profile, which is one of the things that we haven't yet. And where there are people like Christina and Wayne I want to talk to. Yeah, they're hiding from me. Yes, I'm not. I think the profile that's being used for the current implementation for the roadmap of that. So I can't share something. So I have gotten a nod in project previously to do so, but I haven't gotten the actual button up. And I think part of the concern is that I think they want to keep more managing of it with more eyes on it, like John Bradley, who's the co-chairs and stuff like that before it gets contributed to the OpenID working on that. And it can be some, strategic, some partners like get their eyes on it in that early window, like yourselves, right? Where we're just trying to like massage it before it becomes a formal contribution to the working group. So I think that's where there's like a little bit of question marks. It's not even necessarily resistance, it's more like question marks on, is it ready for prime time? I'm so used to the IATS where people come in with just this. We have different. And it's just everybody thinking the same, not even in the same execution path, but is something that we should. Yeah, just to say, They should be. Yeah. But I don't think, so RJ is not, it's the other individuals, and I don't have the document, so I can't. I don't know where it is. It's something to have to wrestle them to ground, and that would be good, because the right people are here. And that's one of the things we can do, like, that's one of the tools that we use for hackathon, the other thing, like, reference code, and we profile, and we like, it's sort of. But tell me, any other feedback from the talk? Yeah, we usually work on. So, any other?
Amazing. So did she ever come back to you?
We spoke on Friday. Did she tell you? Not yet?
Well,
That's
you know,
okay.
what's the thing? It's like, I'm here and she's like here, and
Yeah.
because, anyway.
So are you or you're in her team or?
Right, but we can have us like Mars.
Okay, yeah,
And I run a little small strategy and innovations.
Okay,
But I mean,
you're in her team or you're in a separate area?
we're both in the same product. But we both have the same manager.
Okay. Okay.
Right, but she's one level. But we work, I mean, anyway, we work closely together, but we don't interact. But she was like very curious, so I finally asked her, I said, when you want us to pursue, because she had a question about identity assurance. I think she asked. And I said, well, do you mean like or are you just trying to put stuff out? She never answered. But she has all things I mean, that's what I love about her. It's like she actually stayed just for yours. And I had our CISO.
Hello, all. You can start to take your seats. We'll get started here in just a minute. Thank you.
Just a first. We're gonna start.
Go ahead and roll when you're ready.
Hey everyone, we're going to get started again. If you would take your seats, please. Okay, so I'm Joseph Heenan. I am the certification technical lead at the OpenID Foundation. Just going to give a quick update on the program. So a reminder of what our certification program is about. We're really about encouraging interoperable, secure implementations of the specification, really trying to aid adoption, just based through a set of open source testing tools and what we call self-certification. So There's the certification suite is something we host in the cloud, but you can also download it and run it locally. You can integrate it in your CIs and things like that. But you run the tests against your authorization server or your relying party, or coming soon your issuer or your verifier or your wallet. It gives you mostly a pass or fail result, and then you package up the logs. And if you want to actually have the OpenID certified mark and be listed on our website, then you have to pay a fee as well. So we already have a whole bunch of certification programs running. So OpenID Connect, the logout spec, FAPI1 Advanced, FAPI2 Security Profile Implementers Draft, FAPI2 Message Signing, and FAPI CIBA. But we've also got a lot more under development. So there's the OpenID for verifiable presentation beta test that we mentioned earlier. That now includes the ISO MDL. We're participating in the EU large-scale pilot that Christina mentioned that has over 100 companies participating in it. So we hope to get a lot more people through the test, get a lot more feedback through that. We've got testing development for OpenID Connect for identity assurance, as Mark mentioned. So they're beta at the moment, but with the specs moving to final soon, hopefully, we'll be looking to update those tests, finish them off, fill out holes, get people to run them, and hopefully launch a proper certification program. For FAPI2, we're still working on the Depop tests. Depop is a relatively new standard that we've never tested in the conformance suite before, and it has some interesting extra bits that meant it took a bit longer than the rest of the FAPI2 things. So we're just starting on OpenID for verifiable credential issuance specs. So again, people often ask, why don't we have those? Why are we only testing wallets? It's just a question of prioritization, limited resources. We always felt we'd get the biggest bang for our buck by concentrating on presentation first. So we want to move on to issuance and then testing verifiers as well. For the future roadmap, we're intending to do tests for OpenID Federation, like Mike mentioned earlier. We've had some directed funding from ConnectID. Dima's here somewhere. I don't know if he's in the room or outside chatting, but that's that kind of directed funding to aid the development of the test is always greatly appreciated. For FAPI2, we need to do FAPI2 versions of the CIBA spec, and the latest draft of FAPI2 message signing also uses the HTTP signatures RFC from the IETF. We need to develop tests for that. But we are in a position where we don't seem to have very many implementations of that spec at the moment, so we don't yet have something to test the tests against. So if anybody is implementing those specs, please get in touch with me. I would greatly appreciate it. And we also have to do a new FAPI profile for a new ecosystem we expect to come online later in the year, which is the United Arab Emirates. We expect them to provide some funding for developing those tests again. Again, that's going to be a regulatory requirement for their banks and fintechs to certify to FAPI. So just talk about some other things we've done recently. We've done a new FAPI1 advanced profile for Open Finance Brazil as a result of a lot of implementation feedback they had. They've simplified their specification, which has increased their interoperability and actually made things much simpler for the implementers. That was quite a bit of work, as we had to get all the participants in the ecosystem, which has about 400 banks recertified on that new profile since Christmas. So that took quite a bit of the team's time. We're doing a lot of ecosystem support, so helping UAE, making sure that we understand their profile and it doesn't have any holes in it or things that aren't clear before we start implementing the conformance tests. We've also been talking with more ecosystems like Chile, Colombia, possibly India, and a few others that again are looking to adopt OpenID specs. So as Gail mentioned earlier, we provide outreach to them, help them understand the specs, how they should use it, how they can use the certification tools, what best practice looks like in other ecosystems and that kind of thing. And we've also been tackling some technical debt and bringing dependencies up to date and just that kind of general housekeeping thing that had fallen a bit by the wayside for the past few years as we concentrated on testing, and these things always catch up with you. And as we mentioned earlier in the session about FAPI, there's a lot going on in the USA and Canada. We're expecting regulatory updates to drop during this year. We're definitely expecting them to see them endorse FAPI in some way, whether directly or indirectly. Probably expecting FDX to be a big player in both countries because they are one of the biggest stories in both countries at the moment. But we're not yet sure what those ecosystems will say about certification. So we just have to remain to see. But we've had conversations with the regulators in both countries, and we'll try and have more conversations as we can. I think that's my last slide. So yeah, any questions about certification? Mike.
This is only incidentally about certification. It's about ecosystem development and interoperation. But that said, the certification team has more visibility into the differences between the national FAPI profiles than probably anybody else. And this is probably a much longer conversation, but what is it that's causing nation states to create profiles that are different from one another? A, and B, are there things that the FAPI working group should do to try to make it easier for people to use the spec without substantial profiling?
Yeah, so I think there's two different things going on. One is that FAPI deliberately leaves a few options open to people, so it says you should use MTLS for private key job client authentication, but it doesn't say which, and it says you should use either DPoP or MTLS sender constrained access tokens, but it doesn't say which. So ecosystems that are very much aware of what constraints they have to work under, if they can pick those options, then that makes life much easier for those implementers. So that's an example of the kind of profiling that I think is good and we wouldn't want to discourage. In other cases, then they may be adding custom steps before the authorization, like what we would call the lodging intent pattern. And we do have more interoperable ways to do that probably now, like RAR and grant management. So we are gradually cajoling those kind of ecosystems in the direction where they use those more interoperable things rather than having a custom profile for those.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Just check if we've got any mine as well. Yes, I did mention Columbia TLA Gale. So again, we expect those ecosystems to adopt FAPI. They've got at least draft rules that explicitly mention FAPI. We're trying to get the meeting set up with the relevant regulators to advance that and help them understand how they might use certification. Oh, I think we're done then. Thank you. So Dean is next up.
All right. Thank you, Joseph. My name is Dean Sachs, for those who don't know me. I work at AWS. This is something I'm actually doing mostly in my personal time. I might cry. I hope none of you cry. But you know, we'll go through this and we'll make this work. So I'm here today to talk about death and the digital estate. Because all of us die. All of us will have some sort of digital estate, and we need ways to handle that. And so I'm working on building a community group within the OpenID Foundation to work on this problem. But first, I want to give you a little bit of background. I want to tell you a little about how I got here, why I'm here talking about this, because I'm profoundly uncomfortable with the topic and don't enjoy it myself. But this is my friend Roman. Roman and I met around 2005. We were consultants at Foundstone Professional Services. We did software security consulting, secure security lifecycle, pen testing, other kinds of activities for our clients all around the US. I spent a lot of nights in hotels together, eating and drinking together, hanging out, and we became really close friends. Roman was an adventurer. He was a mountain climber. He was an ice climber. He was a marathoner. He was in great shape, way better shape than I could ever hope to be in. And Roman left us unexpectedly. Roman died when he was 39 years old in 2010. And Roman was a great friend because he was the kind of guy who, we were on a consulting engagement like this one, 45 miles outside of Philly, would say, hey, it's only 45 miles to Philly. Let's go get a cheesesteak in the middle of a snowstorm in December. I mean, it seems kind of weird, but this is the kind of guy Roman was. And I miss him. And when he died, we ran into some problems. And we ran into some problems because Roman had a digital estate that was locked up very tight. Roman was a privacy advocate. He was a security guy. And the choices that he made it really hard for his widow and his two small kids who were under 5 years old to get access to photos and other data that they had. Nobody should have to go through this. After Roman passed away, I spent a lot of time thinking about this problem. And I wasn't involved in identity at the time, but I thought about the idea of a digital dead man switch. And if you don't know what a dead man switch is, there's a terrible name for this talk, at least, but a dead man switch is the idea that if I'm a train conductor, I put my foot on the dead man switch, and as long as my foot is on the dead man switch, I can drive the train. As soon as pressure comes off the switch, the train comes to a stop. The reason is because if the conductor were to become ill or otherwise be distracted from his or her job, foot comes off the dead man switch, train stops, everything's safe. It's a fail safe. And so initially, as I thought about this problem, I thought about how do we get a dead man switch for our online accounts? And then promptly forgot about it because life is busy and lots of things happen in the intervening years. 2022, you probably recognize some of the people on this slide. This is EIC in Berlin. This is the Hilton Hotel in Berlin after a great meal and probably a few too many cocktails based on what's on the table there. But this is starting from the left. You've got Andrew Shikiar, myself, Khaled Zaki, Tim Kapali, and Vittorio. And over drinks, late into the evening, we started talking about death and about the dead man switch. And Tim, who unfortunately isn't in the room, and I wish he was right now, in the way that only Tim can. No, Tim will catch up another time. In the way that only Tim can, Tim renamed this service to DDS, Dean's Death Service. A name that probably should never stick, but this is Tim. So we talked late into the night about this service. We all went home and promptly forgot about it because life got busy. And about a year later, as we all know now, Vittorio became sick. So in July last year, when Vittorio reached out to me and let me know that he was sick, and then when he went to the hospital, this started coming up again. I started talking to others about it and sharing my idea and sharing with my community. And after Vittorio passed in October, we had IIW and we had Authenticate. And it was during those conferences that I talked to a lot of people about this topic. You can see here, Aaron Crow, Ian Glazer, Nishant Kaushik, Teresa Wu, Mike Kaiser, Kalia. All of these folks were so kind with their time and their energy to talk about this and offer ideas and feedback. But the universal feedback I got was, we need to do something about this. And we as a community have not yet. And so, what's the problem? The problem is that death is unfortunately the forgotten state transition in identity. We talk about joiners, movers, leavers, and all of these things, but we don't, and we talk about birthright in identity, but we don't talk about death. And we need to, because it's something that is going to happen to each and every one of us, and each and every one of us in this room has a digital estate. As individuals, we lack clear, consistent, usable tools to enable us to determine the disposition of our digital estate. I can go to Apple and I can set up legacy contacts, and I'll be the first to tell you, I haven't done it. Why? Well, getting a will was hard. Getting the second will was hard. Doing the legacy contacts at Apple, not that hard, just there's sort of a mental pushback against doing the thing and thinking about your own demise. And then to have to do that at Facebook and Google and every place else I do business online would be an awful lot of time to manage and do that work. And so it's not something that most people are doing. So we need ways to delegate access to these accounts. maybe provide access to the credentials to designated heirs, maybe turn over your password vault or your wallet, if that, in some future state. Possibly deleting data or even the entire account. There might be that little private stash of photos that you just don't want anybody else to see that needs to go away, or video or audio or whatever it is. I'm not passing judgment here. I'm just this is reality that we're dealing with, and humans are complex. And there's also a need for evidentiary requirements. What is the evidence that my service provider needs in order to know that an event has triggered delegating access or providing the credentials or deleting the data? Because just somebody saying, oh, so-and-so has passed away shouldn't be enough. What I didn't put on this slide is we also need a way to make people undead, because unfortunately, our federal governments kill people off at times mistakenly, and then they have to resurrect them because they find out they didn't actually die. And so all of this needs to be reversible to some extent as well. And the problem is international, because there's an interplay between local laws, customs, and international systems that we need to think about here. We can't come up with a solution that is going to be anything more than a framework, because anything more than a framework wouldn't respect the individual needs of different countries, different groups of people, et cetera. And so we shouldn't try and solve every problem here, but we should try and provide some high-level work to help begin to solve this problem. So the goal that I've set out for myself, and why I'm here talking to you today, is to establish an OpenID Foundation community group on death in the digital estate. I have started writing a draft charter, and I'll say I've started writing a draft charter because I have a Word doc that has a title on it and has nothing else in it yet, because I've just been too busy to get that part actually done. But I want to deliver this charter to provide a space to bring together experts and other interested parties, both in digital identity and law and policy, to talk about this problem, to develop use cases, to develop the broad data flows, and develop the guidance for service providers who need to handle the event of human death. And also identify what are the out-of-scope issues. What are the things that we should never touch, whether they're legal, political, or social. The financial industry in the US, for example, has a set of laws already that handle death and unwinding your estate. So we probably don't need to touch that. But speaking to another lawyer, I did learn that in places like Coinbase and the cryptocurrency marketplace, they're all over the place. They have a mess. They don't know how to handle this stuff. I'm not saying that we need to get in that business for them, but these are areas that we need to explore. And then longer term, the goal should be to establish an OpenID Foundation working group, hopefully to develop protocols that are based upon the output of the community group. So the community group defines the need, defines the use cases, defines some high-level data flows, and then a future work group develops the protocols. So as I said, the charter's in an early draft state, and I need collaborators. So I would love to get this done by the end of the quarter, end of June this year. If you want to help, you can contact me, deansachs@amazon.com. You can find me on OpenID Slack. You can find me on ID Pro Slack. You could probably find me on LinkedIn and 100 other places too, all of which I need to establish a way to unwind when I eventually die. But if you want to help, please let me know. I would love your help and love to work with you on this, and then seeking collaborators for the community group, hopefully, if it gets established. So questions? Mr. Jones.
Me again. This seems to be adjacent to the problem of another transition from the party being mentally competent to being mentally incompetent and needing supervisory care of some beneficial manner.
Absolutely. I'm glad you called that out. It is so much easier from a language perspective just to talk about death and dying than to talk about all of the other ways in which a human can no longer manage their own assets, their own digital assets. So you are absolutely correct. We need to bring that into scope and make sure that's handled as part of this, and find the language to handle it in a way that's respectful.
Sure.
And more
Yeah.
I think it's more of a question for the group, which is you clearly tested the waters with many, very important people, but I'd love to hear from the audience whether, your organizations are challenged with this, whether you personally, see the gap Because I think we've imagined there's a vacuum here, but maybe there is other good work going on somewhere else, or maybe some people have made real headway that we're not aware of. So good to hear if others think this is a legitimate problem, because ultimately the community group will need board approval to be formed and all that
Absolutely.
good stuff. So just love to hear some more comments from the group.
Okay, Judith? Mike, you got George back.
I'll just say, I think it's very needed. I remember we had a topic, I think, 15 years ago at IW, I'll call Digital Death Day, where we were starting to talk about this stuff. So it's time that we really look at it, because at that time it was just, what are we gonna do with our Facebook and LinkedIn account? But now it's a whole nother world.
It truly is, especially as we start to move into a realm where our credentials are not something that we can manage just in our heads, but now we need a wallet or a credential manager or a passkey manager to manage them for us.
And especially since the generation that we're all moving toward is gonna be the largest generation of people that don't have, that might end up having these ability issues.
Judith said that the generation that we're moving toward is the one that's going to have these issues, and it's gonna be the largest generation that's going to have these issues.
Yeah.
I've got George.
So yes, I think it's a needed issue. I think the critical thing for success is pulling in some of the legal and the policy people, because there's, you know, the issue that Mike touched on. So I'm dealing with both, right?
Right.
I'm dealing with the, you know, the not able to be competent side with my dad, right? And of course, I lost my wife last year. So I got both, and, you know, happy to be involved, but there's a lot of it that is, I think, you know, I feel like there's a larger space in the sort of policy and the structure of, and that kind of stuff than in pure protocols. I mean, I think on the protocol side, it's going to be way simpler, and there may be I'm listening to you talk, I'm thinking, well, there's that thing, there's that thing, there's that other thing that could be leveraged to solve this problem. But some of the other pieces, the more fuzzy pieces, I think are gonna be where it gets harder to try and figure out what to do. And how to get people to recognize that effectively giving a user control over this data, right, is something that our major digital players have to honor.
Yes.
Right, and getting to that space, I think it's going to be a challenge, right? Though I do think that this may be one way to start that move, and we've been wanting to do these kinds of things for some of this digital footprint for a long time, like just pure authorization control of that data, right? And nobody wants to do that, right? What's the business reason? This may be a way to drive that, to start that initiative that then could eventually grow into some other opportunities as well. So I think there's a lot of good stuff here.
Great feedback, George. Thank you.
As one of the people who organized Digital Death Day back in the day, because Death Camp was a terrible name for that. Yeah. One of the issues was also that none of the big cats wanted to come out and talk about this. And I think, you know, like the link, you know, any of the people who held accounts, even though they had internal teams that dealt with it. I think the opportunity with this and sort of potentially having it inside OpenID means some of the cats might come out and talk to each other, so that there can be like, okay, there should be common protocols. Everybody has this problem. How do we collectively deal with it? Well, maybe the time for that conversation is now, because no one wanted to have it at 10, 15 years.
Thanks, Leah. I think you're right. The time is now, because I think you said in one of your talks many years ago, something along the lines of, we haven't yet crossed the point where there are more people who are dead on the internet than alive on the internet. And that really stuck with me, because we are going to cross that point at some point. And just 2 or 3 days ago, I had someone show up on Facebook, say happy birthday, and the person has been dead for like 10 years.
Because there wasn't a way for them, they didn't archive their account, they didn't have someone who could archive their account or do whatever the Facebook terminology is. And I see this on a fairly regular basis, so it's going to keep being in our faces, and it's something that keeps growing until we handle it.
Any other questions? Yeah.
It's not really a question, just a comment. I think this is a wonderful idea. I'd love to support it.
Thank you.
I think it's really important for standards bodies and technologists to be grounding what they're building in the human experience and the human journey. And I think this is a really great initiative, and I'd love to support you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
So I have a question from online. So Michael Plage is asking, has Dean looked at how the transition has happened in Scandinavian countries when a minor becomes an adult?
No, I don't. Michael, you know my email address. Please send me an email. I'd love to hear from you and hear more about that, because that's a new, I don't know anything about that one, but it might be instructive for us. It's kind of the reverse, I think.
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you for your time, Gail.
Good starting discussion. Thank you so much, Dean. And I think you're going to call a session maybe this week as well. You're going to try to. Brilliant. So hopefully we'll get more feedback for the tournament, right? Okay, so very exciting progress there. I'm going to share a few words on the sustainable and interoperable digital identity city hub. It's been moving very quickly. So some of you might have not heard of this at all, since it only was conceived of in June of last year, but it's gaining some momentum pretty fast. I won't have time to go into the whole strategy, but in the deck, there's the link, or more easily, it's at city-hub.community, which is the short form of the URL. It's a big effort, so I think I'll come on to the next page. But we're also thinking about, like, what are the objectives for us as the OpenID Foundation as relates to City Hub, since we're one of the co-organizers that are involved. So here's some messages I'm kind of sharing with the board later today. We have for City Hub a handful of summits coming up this year. So we will meet, I should actually see if I've got that's not the right stuff. Let's see. No, I'm going to riff because I don't have it with me. Okay. So City Hub, the thinking was we have tens of different digital identity programs rolling out globally. Here in the US, we're arguably a little bit more on the back foot because there are only a few states issuing mobile driving licenses. It's probably in the neighborhood of 1 million or 2 that have been issued so far. So it's pretty small scale here in the US. Then of course, there's also the INS, which has got the green card with a verifiable credential, which is starting to roll out as well. But these are really modest scale compared to what's happening in other jurisdictions. Where in Nigeria, you've got more than 10 million. In India, we all know Aadhaar has over 1 billion digital credentials that have been issued. In the Nordics, you have the 2 different bank IDs that are extremely widely adopted. And of course, in the EU, with the EIDAS project, EIDAS 2, they're moving at scale across all of the EU countries to have an interoperable digital wallet. And those are just a handful of the many implementations that are happening at the same time. Of course, the challenge is, as many of us as experts know, they're not all using exactly the same tech stack. They're not even all using the same profiles of things like OpenID for verifiable presentation. So as is today, they're not magically going to work. Whereas for other types of credentials that you might use to assert your identity and to connect with people, like your email or your phone number, it's pretty straightforward, and you just expect it to work. For your passport, when you present it, you now just expect it to work. So how are these locally issued credentials going to interoperate with each other based on the current trajectory that they're on? There's fantastic work on the architecture, the profiles, and so forth, but we have to think of that bigger picture of where we're collectively heading towards and how do we achieve that interoperability. So with that question in mind, how do we achieve global interoperability of these digital identity credentials? We said, let's convene people and just test our hypothesis that this is a problem. Is this a real problem? So we invited what became 22 countries, the major multilaterals of the UN, the OECD, and the World Bank, as well as 25 different nonprofits, academics, standards bodies to convene for 1 day in Paris at the end of November to ask that question and to have a set of structured conversations with 120 people who rolled up to affirm, is this something we really need to unpack? And the wild consensus was all hands in the room went up and we said, yes, this is a real problem. In the exit poll, it was 92% of the people polled said, yes, we should be working on this going into 2024. The other 8% were like, maybe. Clearly, it was a self-selecting audience, but nobody said no, right? Nobody rocked up or was told to come and said, this is a stupid idea. Like, we don't need to waste our time on this. And the concept is that you don't stop any of the work you're doing within your local jurisdiction. That must continue to go ahead. But some proportion of bright minds need to be working towards this convergence question of how to solve for the interoperability. And so the strategy, the structure that we came up with was, it's a bit premature for any one organization to lead everything. It would be premature for any country to dictate to all other countries, this is how to get it done. It's a bit premature to say that any multilateral organization like the UN or the World Bank is going to solve this for everybody else and they can take the leadership on. And it would also be very uncomfortable for any one private entity to drive that, right? Probably backlash. So if the nonprofit community could come together to jointly offer leadership, then it can create a safe space for all of those stakeholders to come together and to work on what the plan would look like. So that's the model that we set up. Not a new entity, but a community group and a safe space to try and work out what to do and how to do it. And the strategy that was developed over the winter was to do two things: set up 5 different work streams and to set up 5 conversations or 5 summits in all 5 continents. And the 5 work streams would start with, what are the champion use cases? There's no natural place to decide what is the use case that one should start with, or what are the top 2 or 3 use cases to drive cross-border interoperability of digital identity. There are many brainstormed ideas. There's the financial services use case. There's the age assurance use cases for, protecting children online or, getting access to pornography. There's, it's so many use cases. It can often be mind-numbing for those that are not involved in identity to realize that it can underpin supply chain of physical infrastructure or underpin supply chain of code and pushing every line of code. And it can, of course, be abused. And there can be compromises in the way that it's set up. So it's wildly charged, and therein lies additional problems for any specific government to take too strong a stance or to figure out what they do. It's like tripping over into so many different remits across a government that's also complicated. So we said the first thing to do is to work on use cases. What would the community say are the natural champion use cases? What's a transparent process to define criteria, to qualify those different use cases, to come up with a sausage-making process to say, here are the top 1, 2, 3. But then it's a manufacturing line, just like any private company would work on a roadmap and try and prioritize the most impactful use cases. So number 1, champion use cases. Number 2, minimum requirements for interoperability of the technology. It's very complex, the layers of the stack, all these different implementations. ADHAR is very different to an EU digital wallet implementation. There are a lot of different considerations from the cryptography down to the presentation and UX, through to the protocols. Is an OpenID standard used or a different standard? And is trust over IP or DIF? Like, where do all these things fit in? And what role do they play? So for those specific use cases that make it through the sausage making factory, what are the minimum requirements to enable the interoperability of them? And again, just like good private sector practice, what are the first building blocks you can put in place to deliver those use cases to set up the foundations for global interoperability of digital identity, right? What is that infrastructure? So that's the second area, really hard. I'm glad I'm not leading that one. The third one is the trust framework mapping, also incredibly difficult. The trust framework being the very beautiful word to describe policies within a local jurisdiction. And how can you then present it? How can one jurisdiction accept a credential that's been developed somewhere else? The work of the Open Identity Exchange is incredibly mature in the work they've been doing. It's obviously got a long way to go as well, but it doesn't have that global buy-in yet. A lot of the stakeholders come from the global north, particularly the UK, parts of Europe and the US. How can they act as a flywheel to munge through some things, bring it into a safe space and a public space like the City Hub to refine and to iterate on how to map the trust frameworks? It's basically what the policymakers would want, to be able to take their policies and have the engines to turn it into mapped trust frameworks, and then for that to turn into the protocols themselves. It would be too detailed for them to start with, here's exactly what protocols I would like you to pick, here's exactly how this trust framework map. And if we had to go with multilateral, bilateral agreements between countries, we'd be here for years, right? So we don't we don't need to take that long. We can be more flexible in how we develop the trust framework mapping and do that in, again, a very transparent way. And the other two work streams are on metrics and on governance. The governance one is both how the community conducts itself. That's more straightforward, slightly tricky because it's not a real entity. But the more interesting part of the governance to me is that we will find that much of the work that needs doing can be done between existing standards bodies or existing nonprofits delivering on their remit or multilaterals delivering on their remit. But we will find some issues that don't have a natural home. So how do we have that conversation that's inclusive to allow us to figure out what exactly the root problem is and then have a transparent process on how to solve for it? All of this to me means we can be much more agile as a community if we're focused and moving at pace. So those are the 5 work streams. The 5 summits are, as on the screen here. The Cape Town Summit is right before ID for Africa. So we'll have good representation from the African community, who also happened to be at our Paris event last November. In Germany, it'll be the day before the EIC, hosted by the German government. In September, it'll be in Washington, D.C., September 10th, just before Identity Week. In Japan will be hosting the one October 25th in some of their offices. And then we're hoping to time the event in November, either just before or during the G20. Because some of you are aware that digital public infrastructure, which includes digital identity, is on the G7 and the G20 roadmap for this calendar year. So all the work that we're doing is getting higher and higher profile, but they obviously aren't going to know how to solve these problems. You're the ones who know how to solve the problems, so we have to do our bit. Probably one of the exciting bits of news is that last month the European Union granted this initiative, this community group, about $110,000, so 100,000 euros, which basically doubled the amount of resources that we have. The rest of the funding is all from, I think it's about 5 nonprofits who chipped in funding, basically on prospect to say that, we collectively agree that this is worthwhile. And several of the other co-organizers are chipping in volunteer time to help pull it together. So many thanks to all those who've been chipping in. So I think I'll pause there after that little diatribe. I will hopefully be talking more about it with some of the other co-organizers, and we haven't read it yet, but hopefully we'll pull up a City Hub card and we'll have a deeper dive session into the strategy, and we'd love to get feedback from the community. So with that, any other initial questions on City Hub and what we're trying to do? Lucy.
I have a clarification question regarding the first work stream on champion use case. Are you imagining all the countries who are involved are aligning on 1 or 2 use cases, where you're thinking about multiple use cases, not necessarily aligning everyone, but kind of a critical mass around these ones?
So good question. So I myself am not an official co-chair of any of the work streams. I think we've got about 14 co-chairs confirmed across the 5 different work streams. And so it will ultimately up to the co-chairs as they set that up to decide the process. But the intention is not to have any countries as co-chairs. The countries may be participants. And so they might be feeding into what is the criteria, what's the selection process, and so forth. But we're not starting with, okay, US, okay, UK, what use case do you guys want the most, right? We're trying to start with what are the kind of brainstorm use cases that came out of the last workshop, and then trying to create the methodology so that everyone can agree to the methodology, and then applying that methodology consistently to each of the use cases. So it's intentionally the other way around, not trying to say, we think we can survey 30 countries and get an official response from each government on what is the use case that they want to do, and starting that way. I think that would, just to be efficient, that would probably take too long to do it that way around. It's a good way as well, but I think it'd probably be too tricky. Does that answer the question? We'll talk more. Very good. Good.
Thank you, Gail. Very good rundown on it. On your slide behind you, it says staffing. And I thought the money that was being used for CD Hub right now was just for the technology and bringing people to the events. So to be able to pay for government officials from countries that otherwise wouldn't be able to attend.
Yeah.
So what does it mean by key staff personnel identified for SIA or IDF?
Sure.
What's the vision?
Sure. So When we think about what happened last year when there were several organizations, there were 3 organizations that chipped in funds. All of the funding that was chipped in, about 30,000 from the nonprofits, all went to subsidizing the trips of African government officials to Paris to attend. So that was very specific to that particular event. Then when, as the co-organizers, we set up the list of requirements for this calendar year, we had like a wish list and then we had to put it all back. So some of the priority initiatives include funding the website, like communications channels, which are going to require some baseline costs, as well as we had put a certain amount of money towards doing things like writing reports, like who's going to write the reports. And we had almost negligible funding towards funding trips, the travel component. So that was kind of more like became the gravy. So happy to talk more about it, but in the strategy document, we laid out what that was. And we're now going to be able to optimize a little bit more because in addition to the $220,000 committed to date, we have another, give or take 30,000, which is in-kind funding. So by the governments of Japan and Germany hosting, we've freed up 30,000. So we have to agree as a group how we're going to use the resources we have, and we haven't locked that down yet. Some of it will need a little coordination because the volunteering alone is not going to be effective. That's what we have to move towards, more maturity and professionalism in the work. Question. All right, thank you. All right, so now we've got our listening sessions. How are we doing on time? Okay, we're exactly on time, I think. 3 on 5. All right, so we have our first folks. I think we're going to have, I will help facilitate this a little bit, I think. Nancy and John, can you come up? Rick, if you're still in the room, the back room, come on up. Andrea should be on the phone. Andrea, can you hear us?
Yes, you should be able to see me too, actually.
Oh, excellent.
Yes.
We'll see. We're not perfectly set up, Andrea, so forgive us if we can't manage to show you on the screen.
No problem.
Anywhere you want us?
I think I was going to do Andrea first, and hopefully I'm going to be able to click on the link. This might be putting this to allow. Aha. Okay. But have a seat for a second, Rick. Have a seat, Nancy. And then also John is hiding somewhere. Maybe somebody can go. You want to go look for me? Thanks, Joseph. So what I have up on the screen, Andrea, was I thought we would start with you, but I'll kick off the conversation, briefly introduce each of you, and feel free to say a few more words about yourself when we come to you for comments. But what we're going to do for today's session is that we wanted to have our first listening session. The board had asked for this calendar year to really listen carefully to what was happening around post-quantum cryptography and around the intersection with identity, so we could just start to prepare, start to think about what it was going to mean to us as a community. And so I asked these 4 individuals to pop in and share a few of their thoughts around what's concerning them, how they would think about preparing for the future. So first on the line, I have the pleasure of introducing Andrea, who's been thinking about this from within the cryptography community themselves, specifically focusing on dilithium. So he'll speak to that work and the journey in NIST to prepare. I would also mention that he had a wild applause, I think the W3C community group, where Harrison had welcomed him to share some of this with that crowd. So he's going to rehash a little bit of that in brief, just in a few minutes to get us started. Then I'm going to turn over to John to share his thoughts on what's real, like what's really happening with the momentum of the work, as well as what can it mean to our protocols as the degree to which they're post-quantum proof, or what are we going to trip over. And then I'm going to ask both Nancy from Cisco as well as Rick from Google to talk about what they think it's going to mean to large platforms thinking about the migration. My question is there a point at some point in this journey, is this like a Y2K inflection point where everyone's going to be in crisis mode thinking about migrating their systems and their cryptography to these post-quantum models? So is the cliff going to come, or are we going to be able to prepare for it, and it'll magically be solved by someone? So with that vague introduction, I'll turn over to you, Andrea, and I'll click through the slides on your behalf, if I may.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for the intro, Gail. So just a couple of lines of introductions to tell who we are and what we do. We do have a company which is named Forkpomp, as well as a non-profit foundation, both registered in the Netherlands. And we've been working with cryptography since 2013, 2014. We got some funding from the European Commission that allowed us to build an open source cryptographic virtual machine. They've been growing. We built an ecosystem around it, and now we are launching our first solutions. This is a slightly improved version of a presentation I gave 2 weeks ago to a crowd from W3C Foundation, focusing on W3C VC with quantum proof or post-quantum signatures. So let's get started. So quantum cryptography, why? Because quantum computers can break most traditional cryptography. And when I say most traditional cryptography, they can basically break all asymmetric cryptography out there. So ECDSA, DDSA, RSA, whatever you're using straight to sign stuff can be broken. So the NIST started a competition, I believe, in 2017. The winners were announced in 2022, and they picked 3 signature algorithms, namely the Lithium, Falcon, Sphinx, and 1 key exchange mechanism. That was a slight update last year because the NIST published a draft of their FIPS 204, defining an updated version of the lithium named MLDSA. Next slide, please. Very important to know is that commonly to the rest of the cryptographic algorithms implemented out there, normally the very first implementations are written in C. There is some people that tries to write alternative implementations in other languages, but the primary language uses C. So whenever you have to integrate them in your existing components and solutions, you need to be working with that. Next slide, please. What did we do? Our virtual machine at Zenroom is written primarily in C, so we could import the libraries straight from the PQ clean and POQ S, I believe it's called. There are 2 libraries maintained primarily by Microsoft people as well as the Linux Foundation. So we just implemented those. We incorporated those in our virtual machine. And well, yeah, I'll just jump to the next slide. So this is what I presented to the W3C Foundation 2 weeks ago. This is our experimental W3C VC with the lithium signature looks like. I don't know how many people are familiar with the nitty-gritty of W3C VC, but it's just a regular W3C VC format 1.1 with the main difference is the crypto suite, mentioning experimental lithium 2024 and the verification method. Next slide, please. So if anyone wants to, if you want me to show what the verifiable credential looks like, I can do it by sharing my screen, or anyone who has access to the presentation, they can just click on the paste bin I posted there and try the curl themselves. I don't know. I was expecting to be sharing the screen myself, but
Sorry, I'm not set up for that. Sorry, we only have a couple of minutes. I'm afraid.
All right, then I think there's one or 2 slides more, but we can just keep them.
Yeah,
that's fine.
Okay. So any parting thoughts before I pass over? We can come back to you in a moment, Andrea, but thank you for kind of sharing the headlines on where things are and like where you are in the implementations. Any last words before I pass over to John for a moment? All right, we'll leave it there for now. John, your thoughts on what's happening in the market right now?
I'd like to say that it's all good, no worries, but from the laughter, you know me. There's a number of dependencies that, so we, I was actually talking to some meta people a couple weeks ago and reminding them that, we started working on Jose together and they bailed out of Jose because they thought they would never need anything other than ECDSA P256 signatures, and why would you ever need algorithm agility? You probably remember those conversations. So Facebook, now Meta, went their own way because they thought algorithm agility was stupid. We implemented algorithm agility, which has put us in not a bad situation, but the reality is that we have a number of dependencies. So yes, we have dilithium and some other NIST algorithms. They haven't yet made their way through the IETF CFRG for finalization. We're also waiting, and Mike is the chair of the COSE working group, can comment on where they're at with adding post-quantum signatures to COSE, which has a sub-item of adding the same thing for Jose. There's weird interdependencies between Jose and COSE. Sometimes we do work in Jose, which adds stuff to COSE, and sometimes the other way around. But the formal way of adding post-quantum signatures to Jose and COSE is currently under development. We need CFRG approval to get algorithm identifiers so that we can actually have interoperability for those post-quantum algorithms. So that's all in progress. We know that will happen in the fullness of time. There are a number of things that people haven't really thought about yet. So being post-quantum secure, but leaving your private keys laying around on a hard disk someplace may actually be more problematic than not being post-quantum secure. So there are all sorts of parts of the infrastructure, like when are we going to have the lithium support in HSMs, so that people can actually securely deploy these algorithms? When are we going to have enough time so that we have side channel resistance on all of these things? Because the implementations are, yeah, they work as long as you're not. So they're resistant against post-quantum computers, but may actually be vulnerable to traditional side channel attacks. So we need experience with deploying these things. And honestly, the biggest issue that we probably have with OpenID in its various incarnations is that we are in most implementations dependent on TLS for trust. So until people actually have post-quantum resistant signatures on their root certificates and their leaf certificates and the TLS stacks that are going to retrieve their entity metadata, we have in Connect Federation, we have a way of signing trust chains, sort of end to end, which doesn't rely on TLS. So when people ask, why would you bother with that? Well, sometimes you can't trust TLS, and there may be, higher security applications that may need trust chains that are verifiable in a post-quantum way before, all of the web infrastructure necessarily gets updated. So if we're looking for a year 2000 scenario, which was a fun time for me, but I think probably the upgrading of web TLS and all of the certificate infrastructure. I mean, honestly, the US military is still using 2K RSA root certificates. That's why I don't live here, man. That's kind of.
You're looking at me and it's like, shh.
Yeah, Okay, don't attack the US military's computer infrastructure. I never suggested it. I yell at them all the time for stuff like this, but yeah, I mean, we still have, even in non-post-quantum in classical cryptography, we still have people doing crap jobs. I mean, increasing people's security to actually using maybe P384 root certificates and signing with P384. The post-quantum computers, the people who can afford post-quantum computers are going to go after the low-hanging fruit. If I were a bad guy, which is of course an entirely hypothetical question, I would go after root certificates because that's the most bang for the buck. People aren't rotating those things. If you're going to attack something, why would you attack a certificate that was being, one of the things that we have in OpenID Connect is that people rotate their signing keys every day. I think Google is daily basis. If it takes you 6 months to break somebody's signing key and they're rotating it every day, you're going to go after somebody else, which is probably one of the reasons why you rotate your certificates every day. So there are a lot of things that we can do without necessarily, before we have all the other post-quantum things in place, we can do some post-quantum preparedness. Don't use the weakest signing mechanism. Make sure that you're, it's not, you don't have to be the fastest runner from the bear. You only have to be faster than the other guy. Choose better pre-quantum algorithms. Actually take care of your, having well-deployed security, rotate your keys on a regular basis. There's stuff that we can do before we actually have the rest in place. But I think, as far as, being able to sign with the lithium, etc., we're probably from a Jose point of view, we're actually going to be fairly well ahead of the curve. It's the traditional TLS infrastructure that probably scares me more than anything. And I know that, as somebody who actually works on HSMs, I can tell you that the major vendors are probably going to be embarrassingly big.
Maybe a good segue, Rick, to your world. Very kind of Rick to agree to speak on this point. So it's not your day job at Chrome, but thanks for sharing a few thoughts on this question, the intersection of identity and cryptography.
Yeah, sure. So I can give you a quick overview of how we're thinking about it at Google. So first of all, I liked your question about do we have a Y2K moment, and I would argue it's not going to be like a Y2K for two important reasons. First of all, we don't know when it's going to happen. At least we had a deadline with Y2K. And secondly, I think Y2K was mostly hype. Maybe that's controversial. I think it was overblown. I think a lot of people made a lot of money by it being overblown. I think this is probably real. Now, we don't know for sure. And so the way we're looking at Google is, so far all we've talked about, I think, really has been signatures. And we're not actually that worried about signatures. Signatures become a big problem, like, the day we know people are actively cracking, and yes, maybe there'll be a big rush. The thing that really scares me, honestly, is key exchange. So the big problem with TLS right now is the problem of store now, decrypt later. So there's almost certainly, my personal opinion is, there's almost certainly lots of entities out there who are capturing TLS traffic today with the plans of decrypting it with a quantum computer in 10 years. So that's what we're trying to defend against right now. And so a year ago, Chrome added support for a standard, one of the NIST winners that Andre showed, Kyber, KEM. And so we're actively doing testing right now on Chrome on desktop platforms with some fraction of our users when using Chrome talking to Google services, or I think Cloudflare has an implementation as well. And then the key thing, great point, John, about like these are new cryptography protocols. They probably have vulnerabilities too. And so our strategy is to use a hybrid protocol where we're using a traditional, non-quantum resistant key exchange in addition to the quantum resistant one, such that an attacker would have to break both in order to break the key exchange. And that way, if there's a vulnerability in the quantum one, it doesn't make this any weaker. And I think probably that would be possible to do with the signatures as well. And so, yeah, so we're actively testing that right now, and our hope is to ramp that up and actually have a larger fraction of our user base and a larger fraction of the page loads, and hopefully getting web servers to upgrade to it, because this is, we won't know this is a real problem until it's too late. So I think that's the thing we have to act on. Also, my challenge to all of you would be to ask, I'm pretty new to the identity community. I've been in browsers for 13 years, but pretty new to the identity community. And are there places in your all's settings where the store now decrypt later threat is a real threat? Generally, that's not a problem for signatures, which is most of what we do. But if there are places where that's a real threat, that's the kind of thing I think we should be urgent in moving on now, and that will help get us ready and learn and be prepared, hopefully, that so that when it comes time to be more concerned about the attack on signatures, we're better prepared to make that lead to.
Great, thank you, Rick. Nancy, how are
you
thinking about it?
What they said. So, I mean, to add on to it, it is a reality. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And to Rick's point, we don't know exactly when it's going to happen. From the standpoint of where we sit, because we're providing the security mechanisms, to John's point, right? There are far other places that we can look at, even in today's solutions, that we lend our implementations to be vulnerable. And so looking at the storage and those mechanisms become a real key. One of the things that becomes important as we look at that transition, Rick, you alluded to it somewhat in that in the transition, as you're saying, the hackers are already storing those keys for, I'll say from a security perspective, for that post-forensic inspection, if you will. And in that transition is where we're going to have that dangerous gap, especially for those that are very critical in the PII community and in the financial community. So this is where it becomes very important to focus, to your point as well. For me, I don't think of the signatures as being the top priority that we need to address. It's really more about the key management and the key exchange mechanisms that we need to focus on and figure out good transitions. So this is just echoing what you guys said. But the other addition that I want to make is customers, to your point. I mean, my entry into the security world was securing Wi-Fi. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with web. I guarantee you there are still customers out there, people, deployments using web. That's the reality. This is the problem. That as we move forward in time, we are only as protected as our weakest link. That is going to be our problem. So when we look at the solutions that we construct and the arguments that we're having in the IETF of, do we use hybrid, PQ, which mechanisms, where do we focus on? It gets to those deployments and how do we serve the community to allow them to transition from that legacy to the new world. And when you look at the reality today, there are a lot of implementations. Today, we're shifting, I want to say most of the mechanisms that we use today are TLS based, even with the Quick and H3 and all of those protocols. And our community is actually able to do this at all levels of the communication stack through hardware acceleration. And again, this is where I'm seeing we're not going to be able to flip the switch. We're going to have a long lag time. Like I said, we still have customers. We've had Wi-Fi for 20 some odd years, and there's still people out there using web. They're still using the first Band-Aid that we put, TKIP, which we said, okay, we'll deploy TKIP and we'll rekey every 15 minutes. So John, to your point, do we really want to rekey at every packet? I don't know, right? So this gets into the analysis isn't just about which PQ mechanism we need to adopt, meaning from a cryptographic construct, it goes to the protocols as well as the overall system, and then taking the deployments into account and doing that analysis of how long is it really going to take the industry? And then at which point do we say 50% of the industry, is that enough? Do we think it will take 3 years? Right? Those are the challenges that we're looking at.
Thanks, Nancy. So with where we are on time, we probably can take maybe 2 comments from the audience, which I think will barely scratch the surface, but before we go to Mike, just in case. All right, Mike, please.
To hybrid or not to hybrid? That is the question.
As somebody who's building hardware security products, our biggest problem with hybrid is that NIST and other government organizations haven't approved hybrid chems or hybrid signatures. So were we to put those in product, we wouldn't be able to get them BIP certified. And that is probably the biggest stumbling block. For signatures, it's an interesting question whether or not you actually need hybrid. So there is a way of looking at it where if you have enough algorithm agility, once you know that that ECDSA is broken, why would you keep signing with ECDSA? If you can from day, one point in time to another, if you can, switch over your infrastructure because you've trained everyone to rotate their key, be capable of rotating their keys. And that was one of the things when we were designing OpenID Connect that we took a lesson from SAML. So SAML allows for key rotation. So once a year, there's a panic because whoever's responsible for your key rotation forgot to renew the certificate, and everybody does a manual fix. And that happens every year. So when we were thinking about, well, how do we make OpenID Connect better? We decided, yes, we should get people to rotate their keys maybe as often as every day, so that nobody is going to have the wherewithal to do a manual fix every day. So having faster key rotation also puts you in a position where you could change algorithms on fairly short notice. So it may be that from a signature point of view, changing once we know that, yes, there are actual attacks on the signature infrastructure. From a encryption point of view, because we really want to do things that are going to still not be decryptable after the quantum apocalypse, hybrid encryptions and key agreements seems like a more important thing, but we're still actually, from a standards point of view, at least from a hardware infrastructure provider perspective, from a certification, what we can get certified, we still kind of have our hands tied behind our back.
Okay, I'm gonna ask one show of hands from the audience as we wrap up here, because we're at time. I know it's very unsatisfactory, we could probably say more, but I wanted to ask the audience like three questions, and the panelists, 3 questions, or a show of hands. From the OpenID Foundation perspective, it's too soon, there's nothing to do here, nothing to see. We'll continue to wait for, maybe it's the IETF and NIST and others to do their thing, but nothing for us to do here. The second is, hey, there is some stuff going on. We should start thinking about it. There's probably a bit more that we should do this calendar year. Jury's out on what exactly that should be, but we should probably start doing a bit more this year. And then the third scenario is maybe next year, let's wait and see. We got to figure out what the trigger points are, but it's sometime in the future, maybe starting next year. So show of hands, who's in the, there's nothing to do here with the OpenID Foundation, maybe do nothing. Okay, we've got a couple of hands. Who's in the, maybe this year we should start doing something. Got to figure out what that is, tactics. Who's in that camp? We got a couple, yeah, a few. Who's in maybe next year, maybe there's some more that's gonna happen in the future.
I think we should start doing stuff now, but so.
Go ahead.
So I don't think that there's anything that we can do right at this moment with post-quantum signatures, but I think that we can do a better job of educating people that they need to rotate their keys on a frequent basis. You need to use more robust signing algorithms. I think there's pre-apocalypse things that we can do to put people in a better situation. And I don't think we need to hold off for all of the new standards to be in place to sort of start moving people you should actually be doing a better job of securing your stuff.
I think Nancy's with you on that, John.
Yeah, I mean, I was whispering robustness, right? So even just giving the best common practices for I'll say, a trustworthy system, John.
Last word from Christina?
I don't know if it's the last word, but the implications on the credentials ecosystem are interesting, right? Because how many signatures are there? And also signatures of what layer are we talking about? Because there is obviously no TLS layer that Rick mainly talked about, but also unlike one-time use ID tokens, to your point, Rick, those credentials are not one-time use. They are meant for, storage for a certain period of time. And on top of that, there's not only one signature, there's potential verifier signatures, wallet signatures, issuer signatures, and wallet signature to some extent depends on the hardware, support in the mobile device itself and cloud HSMs potentially. So maybe it's a bit overwhelming to think about that right now, but that potential, Pandora box waiting is somewhat interesting and relevant. And we're talking about, signatures at an abstraction layer. Interesting at which layer do you want to apply and implement first, and that probably impacts the answer to the question, what does OIDF should do?
So I think for the verifiable credential stuff is a bit different than what we traditionally think of as in OpenID Connect, because essentially we're creating something which is potentially passing through browsers and other things, which has PII. So normally we say, okay, go talk to the credential endpoint and TLS will encrypt it and it's not a problem, but we're creating persistent encrypted objects, which may be laying around in different places. So from I know people who bring up all of this information for later decryption. So that's not hypothetical. They don't like talking about it, but I know they're doing it. So the encryption for the sort of wallet world is one of the places where some application of post-quantum may make actual post-quantum algorithms may make some sense. I think the rest of it, from the signature point of view, can be
We can do it later.
Can be postponed as long as we deal with all of the other security things to get people in a place to, nobody's gonna do anything until everybody knows that it's broken. That's gonna cause
that's the tipping point.
the white, we don't know when the Y2K is gonna happen. It's gonna happen the day after everybody decides, oh no, it's not secure anymore. But we should put people in the best situation to do that, but I think the encryption of PII that we're passing probably needs to be a higher priority than the signatures.
So I'm gonna pause us there on this conversation. Please, let's continue this conversation outside of these walls, but I appreciate the rigorous debate to get us going, because I think it sounds like we've got more to work on. So thank you, Rick, thank you, John, thank you, Andrea online, thank you very much, Nancy. I know Nancy's gonna stay here. We're gonna pull up another couple of people to talk about the intersection of AI and identity, which is also at an early stage. So thank you again. Round of applause to our panelists. Thank you. And now I'm welcoming Nancy to stay seated. I have Gerent on the phone, who's remote with us today. I have Kayleigh Delamo-Prigent, who's a Netlify principal engineer and is co-chairing the Design Tokens community group. And also Mike Kaiser, that many of you know from SailPoint, and who's director of strategy and standards. So before, actually one qualification, I have to disclose, because it'd be unfair if I didn't, that this person's my other half, he's my husband. So he made the profound mistake.
He's right.
Yeah. He made the profound mistake, because we talk about, work stuff, even though he's in a very different world. And he did a prompt, which I'm gonna show you in a moment on the next slide, and you'll see why I sucked him into the panel today. But first I wanted to show a video, which is very disturbing. So if anyone happens to have personal triggers with things having to do with, gosh, what are the terms? Self-harm or pedophilia or violence, feel free to step out or turn off for the next couple of minutes while we show this video. And I'll see if I can get it to come up automatically.
Hey, Mom. Hey, Dad. It's me, Ella. Well, a digital version of me, just a bit older. Amazing what technology can do these days, isn't it? All you need are a couple of pictures, like the ones you share on social media, where they can be taken and used by everybody. I know for you, these pictures are just memories, but for others, they are data. And for me, maybe the beginning of a horrible future. A future where my identity can be stolen, like that, where I can go to prison for things that I would never do. Imagine my credit score being destroyed, Dad. Or my voice copied to scam you, Mom. I'm in trouble. I need you to send me money, please. I don't want to become a meme, humiliated by everyone at school.
Kill yourself, you fucking loser.
And I certainly don't want this. What you share online is like a digital footprint that will follow me around for the rest of my life. I'm telling you this because I know you love me and would never do anything to harm me. So please, Mom, please, Dad, protect my virtual privacy.
So, let's see if I can. Oops. So that's a pretty intense video. And the reason I took the call to share this, and Jaren will talk about it in a moment, is that Deutsche Telekom prepared this video to share, and it's 2.4 million views on YouTube. And has anyone seen this particular video before? A few people in the audience. Pretty scary. I think a lot of us think about these issues already, and I'm not sure how many of us think about our role as identity experts to try and be a countervailing force for some of the challenges that AI poses. And so that was one of the reasons for this discussion on AI and identity. And obviously deepfakes is only one of the possible concerns. We're going to talk about a few different areas as part of the conversation. So thank you to my friends here who joined me on stage. And I'm actually going to start with, actually I do want to show one other thing before we get going, which is, this is why Kayleigh got hooked in. He just off the cuff ran a large language model script to say, how do I implement OpenID Connect in JavaScript? And very quickly came up with a playbook of a few steps to deploy, but the client that it had prompted was actually a couple of years out of date. So it was giving him the wrong advice and some of the wrong resources to use. And along the way, there's no checks to say, oh, go run this against, you know, the OpenID tests that are publicly available and free to use, or consider certifying your implementation at the end, you know, if you're passing everything. There's none of that in there. So we have, as a community, no particular influence or control over the outputs of the large language models, which everyday developers are going to be using. So just wanted to have you have that in mind. So the prompt for today and for the next 20 minutes, 15 minutes, is, you know, what concerns you about the intersection of AI and identity? What is our role as the OpenID Foundation to support the community in this? And I'm asking each of our 4 folks to just share a couple of minutes on what they think. So Jared, can we start with you online?
You most certainly can. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Fantastic. So just to explain our organization, Dayon, we're a biometric service company. We concentrate on it, helping people to onboard, helping people to get recognized, to get services, and then go on to actually be authenticated when they return to that service, whether that be across channel using face or voice primarily, but also connecting with other on-device and other biometric solutions as well. So what I bring to the party is kind of like a little bit of a reflection on how kind of AI has always really been present when it comes to our business. I think what's probably changing is that it's been getting better and better, more accurate and more accurate. It's been a force for good, reducing bias, getting people their access to their service, and that's been a very positive thing. And now you've got a fundamental market dynamic shift with generative AI. New tools creating that synthetic data are evolving. It creates more and more accessible tooling, some of which we've just highlighted. These are improving every single day, and they put really what was previously specialist tooling in the hands of more and more users. And that creates a real moral question centered around impersonation. And you can go so far as to create new content, whether that be face or voice, and it looks like the real thing. You can ask a tool to create content for a 20-year-old American man, being able to specify the language, their message, and all being interactive. And that kind of creates a real challenge as generative AI makes that synthetic and deepfake content far more accessible and believable. Now, from our particular point of view, that creates a real intersection between the challenge of AI for good and AI for bad. The bad's obviously not constrained by privacy, ethics, compliance, any sort of regime at all. And it becomes freely available and it improves every single day. And at the same time, AI for good is trying to help build strong UX, create training data on which biases can be reduced, and also learning modules to identify and defend against the bad AI. So really the challenge for good AI at the moment is to navigate the tightrope of consumer fear, of privacy, to enable without kind of being perceived as negative. And obviously our business can often be described as quite negative and intrusive. And if we just touch on some, sorry, go on.
That's right, last thought there? Okay, we can come back to you, Jared, if you have some parting thoughts, but thank you, you know, as an expert working on the provision of those services, that you're in the middle of it, right? In the middle of the challenges with deepfakes, how to offer services to mitigate them as well. So Kayleigh, who is wearing the hat of the everyday developer who's going to be pulling from large language models, this is a different angle on the challenge, right? Like what it means to have our specifications obviously generally available out there, consumed, repackaged, and presented to end developers. Kayleigh, maybe you can share a few thoughts.
Yeah, so we're at Netlify, where we provide tools and infrastructure to help developers around the world to provide to get a web presence easily. And what we're seeing is that the use of AI is pervasive. There's most of our developers internally and our customers now are using AI to, at the very least, autocomplete what they started typing. And when it comes to my case, it's more than 50% of my code at this point is generated by AI. Now, when I don't know a topic and I copy paste code from ChatGPT, that's scary. That is tools that I don't know what I'm doing with. And in the case of infrastructure, that can become a little bit problematic. And so as you build those bricks and you have those very complex specifications, people are going to try to find the path of least resistance. Developers are lazy. That's I mean I am. And the way things are going to happen is that we're going to see more and more crap being shipped to production. Not that human developers are perfect coders, but I think we're going to see more and more bad code coming out in production. If it's just a website with just a few JavaScript widgets here and there, that's fine. But if it's identity, that's a bit of a different problem. So in the case of ChatGPT, it does, towards the end of its answer, always refer to the specs. But when the specs is hundreds of pages, come on, like no one is going to actually do that. So I wonder what the solution might be. I was thinking maybe a group could think about creating a custom GPT or interfacing with OpenAI or certain other folks in Microsoft, Google, etc. I haven't tried that kind of prompt with Gemini, but I assume it's kind of the same thing. Anyway, there's probably ways to improve that, and I'm sure large companies that are providing these services also don't want to provide crap. And if I don't know if anyone had looked at the answer, but there's two big problems. One of them is actually a security problem. So if you want to talk more about this later, I don't have time to go too deep, but yeah.
It wasn't even pointing to the right thing, right? Pointed to the wrong file.
And so, yeah, there's research papers that have shown that this kind of text can lead to security holes. So
it could be compromised by bad actors, right? Trying to infiltrate the answers of the large language model.
Absolutely. So
train it poorly. Thank you. Oh, sorry, we're not quite done. Forget YouTube. Let's see, who would like to jump in next? Nancy?
I'll be short.
I got the mic. Okay, so since I'm the security focused one, I will say we've been using predictive AI techniques for decades to be able to be effective in detecting the threats that are coming through, I'll just say, the digital world that we're living in. What I will say, and I think Gerard said it, is generative AI has changed the game in the world of AI. So I think we all know, even in the Google search, well, any kind of search, including business operations, AI is a way of life today. What has changed with the introduction of ChatGPT is that barrier to entry to leverage artificial intelligence has greatly lowered. And so while it has improved the world of how can we, be more effective in our research, how can we improve our coding or code faster, the same thing is happening in the dark world. So just as much as we're creating the tools, there are tools already out there where you can buy malware as a service, you can buy fraud bots, you can buy, and what I'm seeing, the threat, and I was discussing this with my husband, he goes, I think it's an existential threat. It's like, well, this is where there's the new science, so as much as we talk about machine learning and artificial intelligence, there's a new name for the adversarial machine learning. So there's a lot of research and startup companies building up to allow us to figure out the techniques in which we can detect. I think, not to politicize this, but I think some regulation will be needed. But again, how do you enforce it? And the enforcement really goes to how do we ensure that we can watermark anything that's AI generated? We can watermark, we can make that distinguisher, right? That's still a long ways away, but again, the hacktivists are out there trying to figure out how to foil this. On the generative AI, same thing. The GANs, so the generative adversarial language, is coming to the forefront. So where it does become very concerning from an identity perspective, much like you saw the visual cues, the same thing is happening with the biometrics. So when ChatGPT was introduced a couple of years ago now, brand new field, lots of excitement, lots of innovation happening. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Hugging Face, huggingface.io, yeah? So you can get open source models there. You don't need the compute power, you don't need the gazillion tokens that's offered now. I think they're getting into ChatGPT 5.0. But this is to say, when they started, they've introduced a couple of hundred models. So 2 years ago, when I looked at their page, they now offer over 600,000 models, specialized for speech, text, image. So that's on one pivot. They are working on refining the models in the directions to make the different workloads and tasks, if you will, much easier for you to leverage and use. So that's on one pivot. The second pivot is they're reducing and optimizing, reducing the size of the model to optimize its efficiency and needed storage and compute time. So this is making it that much easier, not just for us. Sorry, my world is security, so I always think about the dark side. So we're enabling the dark just as much as we're enabling the light. Third pivot is compute and Moore's law and the likes of NVIDIA, and TensorFlow is already open source, is the notion that even with the compute technology and the hardware, we're enabling and facilitating these autoencoders, these machine learning techniques to run even faster in your laptops, if you will, in your mobile devices. So where I'm going with this is just as much as AI helped us speed the time in which we were able to get effective vaccines for COVID, for example, right? So I don't know if you're aware with this, but there were some models used by Moderna using NVIDIA to accelerate the production and the formulation, of the vaccines. This means that now for the bioengineering, they're using AI as well that the hackers can use for the metrics. So these are things that are concerning me, and I'm trying to figure out that balance of how can we better figure out the enforcement of using AI and generative AI explicitly, more responsibly, as well as knowing that there'll always be those that will say, okay, I'm just going to think out of the box, figure out how to break the rules, do my own thing. And so trying to figure out those technologies that allow us to detect those techniques as well.
Thanks, Nancy. Mike?
Well, Nancy's already said most of what I was going to say. I have a background in philosophy and theology, so I come at this from yet another direction. I think there are two things. One is making governance frameworks practical. For about 6 years, I've been looking at different approaches to AI and ethical uses of AI, and there was a standard by IEEE and about 4 others, and trying to find practical tools to let organizations actually take action and force thought. Because typically they say, we don't want to think through this with the IRB or anything because that takes time and people say no. So that's one hand, right? Making tools and open source things really easy. As mentioned before, Gen AI, LLMs kind of flip the script a little bit. Because how many of you know people that use ChatGPT to do everything, or LLM's equivalent, right? My sister-in-law is currently taking a UI course, and she's using it basically to do the course for her. So my point is that people are empowered, as Nancy said, to just do things because it's easier, right? Without thinking ethically through the consequences or anything else about that. Now, governments and regulation are catching up, right? They're like, oh, this is a real problem. The video kind of illustrated that, right? The latest version of this is the EU AI Act, right? Making its way through legislature. It calls for watermarking. It calls for not quite an SBOM for identity, but identifies high-risk usages, these types of things, bans it. Now, whether or not you can enforce that, you can prove it, is a slightly different thing. And as you kind of hinted at, the tech is kind of way behind. To do watermarking in a lot of these systems, you have to own the model itself that generates it in the first place, et cetera, which leads us to something else Nancy mentioned, which you were hitting all the hits, which is great. Once I was looking at the regulations and everything, I started moving into adversarial research. So open source attempts to defeat facial recognition systems. That would be something that Dean encountered earlier today, facial recognition systems. Because in one way you have, yes, it'd be great if enterprises did it and governments enforced it, and that's the way to do it. But while you wait, how do you empower normal people to protect themselves? Like the girl's parents there. Now they've made a mistake, right? And that points to something else that's really key here, is that whatever you do at this point, to use a Texan phrase, even though I'm not much of a Texan, the cow has left the barn, right? People ask me about my facial recognition. If you Google me, you can find me and use me, right? That ship has sailed. So a lot of the approaches that I worked on over the last 4 to 5 years were facial recognition alterations in the flow of taking pictures and things. What that does is it addresses stalking use cases and these other things, right? It's one thing to identify someone or to create disinformation. It's another thing to be able to track them and know where they are at all times. So there's a couple of different aspects there that are important, basically giving people ways to participate in the process itself. So I'm gonna stop there.
Thank you. Incredibly thoughtful. So please.
One last thing.
Yep.
Pro tip, if you want to protect your identity and your face is already out there, your face is already out there, put yourself in open source photography. If you do that, you will be everywhere and nowhere. I used a face that I couldn't generate back in the day, and a friend of mine said she's already been used on the internet. I looked it up, Google reverse image search. It was upwards of 25 billion hits. She was a lobbyist in DC. She was a sex worker in Vegas. She was a political activist in Thailand. One actual mystery writer was using her face as her jacket cover photo, which meant that you never really knew who she was. Not recommending that, but that's kind of extreme option.
Goodness. Okay, so I think as we're exactly at time now, another conversation we're not going to be able to feel as much closure on as we would like, and at least some of the board members will pick this up later today. But the big hand raised for the audience, I suppose, I'll try and ask this again in three ways. So there's nothing to do here. OpenID Foundation, not our jam. Other people are taking care of this already. This is our jam. There is something that we need to care about. You're feeling this provocative statements of the 4 speakers. And 3 is, okay, maybe at some point in the future, we're not quite there yet. Maybe it's next year. We got a lot of stuff we're thinking about right now. So those are the 3 scenarios. So the first one, hands up. There's no there. We don't need to worry about it. Everything's, gonna be fine. This isn't our jam. Don't need to worry about it. Seeing no hands. Second one, this is something we should be working on now. We should probably be figuring out more around which of these angles we need to focus on. Any hands up? Pretty good representation. And then the last one, maybe next year, maybe at some point in the future, maybe we'll get there where we need to care about it. Okay, good. I think it gives a little temperature check that for those of you online, what we saw in the room was not really anybody putting up their hand for the first one, a bit of a mix, roughly 50-50, between do we start something now, we do something next year. But I think the board's intuition that we've got a watching brief, we're definitely on the right track. We should be paying attention to all these concerns. And I hope whether it's IIW this week or in the weeks and months ahead, we continue to synthesize as a group, what we think tactically and strategically we can do. So thank you again to our speakers for chiming in on this topic. So with that, we come to a quick close. 4 o'clock, I know the board members are going to be stepping next door to continue with the board meeting. For the rest of you, I hope I'll see many of your faces at the IIW for the rest of the week, and we'll have time for sidebar catch-ups. Mike, any thoughts?
For the board members, Dirk will let us in. We need a pass to get into the next room for the town meeting. Go outside the doors, immediately to the right. Dirk will let us through, and we're to the right about halfway down here called back paddle.
Back paddle, great. So board members to back paddle, and generally, if anyone would email me, director@oidf.org, with any comments on how you'd like to see this improve. We're thinking about going full day and changing the structure. So if you have any preferences on what you'd like to see, please let us know. We welcome your feedback. Have a good day. Thank you. Job done.
Yeah, I don't.